Good afternoon, Milwaukee. This is the Mark Belling Late Afternoon Show on News Talk 1130 WISN. As you know, I have been very, very critical at my program of Wauwatosa Mayor Dennis McBride and other leaders of Wauwatosa, who I think have been weak and have acquiesced to the demonstrators and protesters who have been carrying on in that city now for weeks, really for months, with protests that have at times degenerated into violence and very, very scary situations. Mayor McBride has asked for the opportunity to come on the program and address some of these questions and explain why they're doing, I'm going to say this, not trying to put words in his mouth, why they're taking the approach in Wauwatosa that they're taking and where he's coming from on these issues, and says he, as opposed to ducking and running away, which is what most liberal public officials do, actually wants to have the opportunity to come on the air. He will be on this afternoon. It will be 4:30. I will challenge him, but I will also try do everything. I want to challenge him. I don't agree with him, but I am certainly going to allow him to put his side out and explain his position without me just rolling over and saying, okay, that's a great and wonderful thing. Anyway, we'll be doing that right around 4:30 this afternoon. There's always a chance. The president and his events are now done in Kenosha. He is headed, they're flying out of Waukegan. That's the airport that they're using just to the south over the state line. If something comes up or the president makes some ground-shattering statement at the airport or something, I guess we would talk about this. There's always a chance that that interview that we have scheduled with the mayor would be moved, but highly unlikely. One of the topics that we're going to be dealing with today is this remarkable revelation that came out over the weekend from the CDC. This is the government's own number, that 94% of the COVID deaths in the United States were of people who had other significant underlying conditions. In other words, only 6% of the people who died of COVID died only because of COVID. This is one of the reasons why you saw this gap that we have seen consistently through the COVID situation of who actually died from COVID, where the official numbers were always lower than the initially reported numbers. And that's because in most areas, medical examiners determine the cause of death. And one of the things that we've learned during COVID is that the cause of death isn't always clear. As an example, let's imagine somebody, and I don't mean to be morbid here, but this has happened. Somebody gets a terrible diagnosis. They have a fatal disease. They're going to die in a couple of weeks. Some of them, truly mortified, kill themselves right there. Well, obviously, the cause of death was the thing that, if they shot themselves in the head or whatever, that's the cause of death. But it's misleading to consider that to be a death that could solely be attributed to the one thing, because the person would not have killed themselves had they had the other. Better example, perhaps less morbid, is exactly what you have going on with COVID and many other situations. Some people are they've got, I know people in my own life that right now have 3, 4, 5, 7 things that are really bad. The older you get, the likelier you are to get these things. And also, as your body starts to break down, even if it happens to you at a younger age, it breaks down and you're vulnerable in all sorts of areas. So then you die. Well, which one of those 7 things was the one that killed you? Often, you can't pinpoint it to one. You just died. There was too much going on. What has happened during COVID is that we've marked out every one of those deaths as being a COVID death. The point is that a significant majority of those people probably were dying anyway. Lots of people have gotten COVID. But the vast majority of those who have died were people who were really, really sick. Now, many of us have been pointing this out for months, but didn't have any numbers to back it up. But it's simply common sense. What I just said about COVID could be said about any number of other illnesses. I personally know several people for whom the cause of death was pneumonia. But they got pneumonia after they were already in the hospital and were extremely sick of other things. When your immune system breaks down, you're likelier to get pneumonia than if you're really, really healthy. This is believed to be one of the reasons why so few kids appear to be getting COVID. They have stronger immune systems. They haven't been through all the crap of life that the rest of us have gone through. So if indeed the great majority of people who got COVID were in fact already at death's door, it means that we have probably overreacted to COVID more so than any other health threat in modern history. The actual number of deaths in the United States that can be traced solely to COVID, in other words, COVID was the only condition that a person had, is under 10,000. That would be a weak flu. Now, I grant you the following. Just because someone had other serious underlying conditions doesn't mean they were going to die from them. Maybe they had 2 or 3 things, but they were fighting them off, or they had a chance to live. COVID came in and that was the knockout punch. To use the analogy of a boxing match rather than my normal football analogy, and I think that this is a good way to explain it. You watch a boxing match and a fighter's taking several big punches and he's kind of teetering and he's reeling. And then he gets the haymaker and that knocks him out. Well, for some people, COVID was the haymaker that knocked him out. But in many instances, probably most, they were already reeling. But if you watch boxing matches, sometimes those guys that are reeling, they recover, they bounce back, and they actually can come back to win the fight. So it's hard to know how many people COVID actually killed. It is certainly accurate, however, that if you don't have a number of serious underlying conditions, COVID is essentially nothing for anybody really to worry about at all. Less than 10,000 people who didn't have any other underlying condition have died of COVID. Well, 10,000 is not exactly high up there on the Grim Reaper chart. This leads me to a point that I want to make about statistics. Statistics are very easy to manipulate. You can make a statement with a statistic that is true, and it can be accurate, but that doesn't mean that it isn't misleading. You can do this with sports, for example, all the time. You can say something, and if you don't put it into context, people might have a very, very misleading view of it. They're just talking about the Dow Jones finally hitting an all-time high. It was one of the last of the averages to do so because it is heavily weighted by the tech stocks as some of the others that happened today. The stock market averages are easily manipulated. You know, they throw companies out of the Dow Jones average. They just did it last week. If you want to make the Dow Jones average, let's imagine my goal was to make the Dow Jones average look really good. Well, you'd only put in at 30 stocks that looked like they were going to go up. If there are a couple of turd balls that were headed for the toilet, you don't want to put them in there. Now, I'm not saying they do that with the Dow Jones. What I am saying is that when you choose an average of something like that, it can lead to misleading information. Many people have commented that the media wrongly focuses on the S&P 500 as a barometer of the stock market. For the longest time, many pundits were saying that you shouldn't look at the Dow Jones. It's only 30 stocks. The S&P 500, which is essentially the 500 largest American companies, publicly traded American companies, is a much better indicator of how the actual market is doing because 500 is a better cross-section than 30. But now many of those people say the S&P 500 is extremely misleading. You know, most companies in the S&P 500 are not having good years. Most. But the S&P 500 is weighted by market capitalizations, and the biggest of the big, they're having spectacular years, and those are the tech companies. The S&P 500, I forget what it is. It's like the top 7 companies are 40% of the S&P or something in terms of the impact of the averages. In other words, Apple, Microsoft, Alphabet, Facebook, Amazon, etc. Well, those companies, those big tech giants are having very, very good years. So therefore, the S&P 500 as an average goes up, even though most companies in that 500 are not up for the year. Again, let's imagine you simply took the same 500 companies but did not weight them by market capitalization. So in other words, they were all considered equal. That's what the Dow Jones does. I don't want to bore you on the stock market because I'm talking about statistics here, but the Dow Jones average is not weighted. Every stock in there is considered equal. But the S&P 500 is weighted according to size. So therefore, if Apple goes up, the S&P 500 is going to go up far more than if, say, the 500th largest company in the average went up by the same amount. Well, let's imagine the S&P 500 decided to change that and they were going to weight them all equally the way the Dow did. The numbers for the year would be radically different. So you can manipulate a statistic based on the way you put together the thing on which the statistic is based. So, to COVID. Let's imagine your goal. Now, before I even make accusations that this was done, let's just imagine that your goal was to make the COVID death toll look as high as possible. What would you do? Well, you'd include anybody who had COVID at the time of their death in the COVID death toll, even if COVID didn't kill them. People made the comment, it isn't even that jokingly, should George Floyd be considered a COVID death? He had COVID at the time of his death. Were it not for the fact that it would have been considered highly offensive, there's a good chance they would have done so, because in many cities, anybody who dies with COVID was counted as a COVID death. Well, let's suppose you don't go that far, that you're not so unethical as most of these public health officials around the state of Wisconsin and the United States are, and they're counting anyone who dies with COVID as a COVID death. How about someone for which COVID is one of several factors that you had when you died? In other words, you may have had a heart disease, diabetes, overweight, and a few other things, any one of which may have had you at death's door. Counted as a COVID death. That's what we've done. And therefore, the statistic that came out from the CDC over the weekend, 94%, that's just under 19 out of 20, 94% of the people who have died of COVID in the United States had other significant underlying health conditions. By counting all of those as COVID deaths, you make the COVID death number higher. Now again, if your goal was to make the COVID death number look high, you would do what they did. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they were trying to make it look high. I think they were trying to make it look high. I think that there has been a desire from the beginning to make the COVID situation in the United States appear to be as bad as possible. Now, let's imagine they did the opposite. And again, I don't know what the magic criteria is, but let's imagine they only counted as COVID deaths the people for whom died with COVID was the only serious health problem they had. Then the number of deaths would only be 9,000. And nobody would be paying any attention to COVID. So the way they chose to put together the statistic and the way the media chose to report the statistic had a significant impact in the way that we as a country have reacted to this. This number, as I said, came out from the CDC over the weekend, and I'm telling you, you need a magnifying glass to find it in the mainstream media. I'm not saying it's not out there. And I've been mentioning that the New York Times has gradually been changing its tune. They're always the first in the media to change their tune because they realize, especially in New York, that these long-term lockdowns are not sustainable. And we can't, every time some virus comes through, panic and hide ourselves in the basement. And I don't think it's long-term sustainable to say that we're going to be wearing masks for the rest of our lives. But this stat, and again, this is the CDC's own report, that 94% of the people who died with COVID had other serious underlying health conditions. That ought to be the biggest story of all, because it tells us that if you don't have another serious underlying condition, it's extraordinarily unlikely that even if you get COVID, that it's going to kill you. Now, my next point on this. This explains why, when you've seen these charts, the people who get COVID when they're in their 90s die at a higher rate than those who get COVID when they're in their 80s, who die at a higher rate than people who get COVID when they're in their 70s, who die at a higher rate than people who get COVID when they're in their 60s, and all the way down. Why? Because the older you are, the more things you're likely to have. Talk to some of these poor guys who are 98. What do you have? Well, I'll save you time, tell you what I don't have. That's what happens. The people who live to be a very old age are often extremely healthy people, but they're also people who, because they were extremely healthy, have been able to fight off all these things that they have gotten that killed all of their buddies. The younger you are, the less stuff you have, usually. And as has been noted many times, those that are in the younger demographic that have died often had very serious other health issues that were going on with them at the same time that they got COVID. This certainly did not mean that COVID was a nothing. It also, though, does explain. And the media has never had a desire to explain any of these things because the media no longer reports the news. The media instead spins things to lead people to a conclusion. Many people have been asking why the death rates across the world were so different. Despite what Biden says, the United States does not have the highest death rate per population in the world. Many countries, including England, are higher than us. But according to what China's been telling us, their rate is way lower than us. Well, aside from just lying about their statistics, my guess is that China, not wanting to make it look like their whole country was dying off with COVID, didn't count any of the people who had other underlying conditions when they died. In other words, China wanted to make their numbers look as low as possible. So if you were in China and you had diabetes and cancer and 4 other things, and then you got COVID and then you died, China's not going to count you as a COVID death because China didn't want their numbers to look high. So when you consider that here in the United States, we were throwing in there everybody who had a hangnail who got COVID and then that's a COVID death. Of course, our numbers were going to appear higher than others. And that would be a useful piece of information for deciding where we're going to go forward now. And as I've been arguing to people from the very beginning on this is a new virus and we need to learn from it based on what's happening. And once we see what's happening, we need to adjust. And what's the information that we now have with regard to COVID in terms of its mortality rate, whether or not it will kill you, is that this is not a particularly serious killer. It is, however, something. If they see a guy standing on the edge of the building, COVID's going to be the thing that'll shove him over. Like a lot of other serious issues. The people who die from the flu often are sick of other things when they get the flu. And I've been commenting throughout this thing that so many of the people that have been panicked over COVID are people who yawn about the flu every year. Even though COVID and the flu are very, very similar kinds of viruses. In fact, some people believe COVID and coronaviruses are a form of the flu. That flu is just a category without a specific definition. Paul says you're hearing the term twindemic. So in other words, they're going to try to transition and move us over now to the flu deaths and turn that into the thing, claim that we have, yes, flu with COVID, and therefore we have to stay under the thing because now COVID doesn't do anything to anybody. Now it's the flu. So in other words, the flu that we've ignored forever and ever and ever, we're now going to suddenly start taking seriously because there's certain people that want to keep us locked down forever. The point that I make, though, is that we have had a country in which I think that I've talked about it in the past. I never remember what it is. Some people get the flu shot every year. Some people hate vaccines. Some people think vaccines work, but they don't care if they get the flu or not. I get the flu vaccine every year. Some people never get it. When you ask them, why don't you get the flu vaccine? They don't like vaccines or what do I care about the flu? Many of those people say, what do I care about the flu? Have been panicked over COVID. Even though, as I say, they're very similar and they're transmitted in similar fashions. The answer, of course, is I really can't think in my lifetime when the media ever tried to panic anybody over the flu or talked about the flu as this terrible killer. The worst flu that we've had in the last several decades was H1N1 in 2009. And it was a bad one. And I remember when the coronavirus thing was coming out and people were comparing it to, this might be the most significant outbreak that we've had since H1N1. The number of people who said to me, I don't remember it. And as I commented at the time, I know everybody, the people who remember it all fall into one category. They're the people who got it. If you got it, you would remember it. I didn't get it. But I know some people who got it. They got really sick. They were quarantined. I think I told the story about the guy that was quarantined at a beach house on the Gulf. He's quarantined, though. He had to sit in there, and they'd deliver the food to the door, and when the people would run away and he grabbed the thing, he was stuck in there for a week, 10 days, or whatever it was. It was a bad one, and he said he was really sick. Well, if you're really sick, you remember it, but for the rest of us, we don't remember it. Why don't we remember it? Because we didn't do anything. I don't, honestly, maybe we did. I honestly don't recall one thing that we did other than the story was in the media. They tell you the same thing they tell you all the time. Wash your hands, cover your face, etc. You know, sneeze into the crook of your elbow rather than, well, yeah, the vaccine came out months later. The vaccine came out, and yeah, I did that story, but I'm saying nobody remembers the thing actually running through. People remember the vaccine because we had people standing in line for hours to get the vaccine. A week and a half later, you could walk right in and get it. Which again just shows you how people who say, well, I don't pay any attention to the media. The media really can manipulate people. Oh, they were terrified to death. It's, as I said, this is like when a movie comes out. Why go the first day? Wait 3 weeks when there's nobody in the theater. Paul said, don't forget the word. All right. Want to do the word? We didn't have a winner yesterday. You screwed this all up. I know you did nothing. That's what we didn't have a winner. All right. Tried to have a winner yesterday. We didn't have one. Maybe I should try not to have one today. Maybe then we'll get one. Now, usually if I make a concerted effort, we get one. Sizzling Summer Cash Contest, text in where you have until 4 o'clock to text in LOVE, L-O-V-E to 200 to get a text confirming entry, plus iHeartRadio info, standard data, and message rates apply. In this nationwide contest. The reason that people didn't remember H1N1 unless we got it is because we didn't do anything. We didn't cancel sports seasons. We didn't cancel school. We didn't put people in a work-at-home mode. We did nothing. Now, it was covered. I mean, it was a big story. I'm not saying that the media didn't do anything with it at all, but they never raised the notion that we ought to be doing anything beyond, as I say, sneeze into your elbow, don't wash your hands, don't touch your face, all the stuff that they always tell you to do. There was also, and, many people have connected the two. Barack Obama was president of the United States. He didn't do a damn thing. Because Trump was president of the United States and it's an election year, there are many who believe that COVID was overreacted to by people who had a goal of trashing the American economy because everyone knows that the economy under Trump was the strongest economy perhaps in American history, and incumbent presidents always get reelected when they preside over a great economy. There wasn't any particular need to trash the economy during Obama in 2009. The economy was already in the early stages of recovery, but it also wasn't an election year. Obama wasn't going to be on the ballot for 3.5 years after H1N1 showed up. The CDC itself is now in this grudging position of, I think, trying to self-adjust. The so-called experts do this all the time. I talk about how liberals do it all the time. They'll go on and on and on about a crisis, and then when it turns out not to be a crisis, the thing that they suggested didn't work, they're just on to the other thing, or they'll say, well, now we have new information. It's like I've been laughing about this one. When's the last time any lefty carried out about the straws? That's just gone. They've moved on. They've totally moved away from the straws, destroying the ocean. Now let's make sure you wear the masks and so on, because they just went on to it. They went on to something else. What? Paul said the masks are littered all over the parking lot. Yeah, I swear the thing that's going to kill me is all these masks with their germs that are laying around. Then I hear about these people. Again, the thing, while I take this stand in which I'm kind of COVID is an overreactive thing. People who know me, there are people who know me who think that I, am more on the germ freak side of, if the spectrum is on one end, total germ freak, afraid to go outside, takes 47 showers a day, and somebody on the other side, total pig, never washes his hand after going to the bathroom, etc. I would be on the germ freak scale of things. Now, I wouldn't be over there on the germ freak thing, but I would be more of that than anything else. I can't imagine not washing my hands after going to the bathroom, and I think that you go to the grocery store, you see people feeling up the produce and all of this stuff. Well, I really want to have that cleaned off. And a lot of things, perhaps you might even consider me to be a germ freak. I just can't imagine wearing a mask 2 days in a row. But apparently everybody does. I mean, it would to me, back in the days in which men carried handkerchiefs, that industry just went to hell, didn't it? I know, they have like the, what do they call that when you put it in the suit? Not the lapel, there's a term, pocket square. No guy uses a handkerchief anymore. We just grab Kleenexes or toilet paper and put it in our pockets and so on. Your dad, as I said, it's just sort of an old man's thing that kind of went away. But to me, wearing a mask 2 days in a row would be like using a dirty handkerchief 2 days in a row. Okay, you got all your snot in there from the first day, you put it in again. To me, it's just repulsive. Now, what I've noticed, and I'm at this situation, I knew this would happen to me. Masks are my new pen. I'm losing these things like crazy. So I'm going to have to do it. Eventually, I just bought 500 pens from Amazon. I bought all these they'll sell logo pens to you. In other words, like some bow and arrow archery shop in Salt Lake City, Utah had more pens than they needed. They had returns, and they'll just sell you logo pens in bulk. You can buy those. In fact, this one that I hold, it's one of they're very, very, very cheap. This one is for the State Farm Insurance agent in Midwest City, Oklahoma. Well, a lot of people buy these, by the way. It's a huge thing. And when Amazon got out there, they just came up with a way to sell those things in bulk. I need to just buy like 500 masks. So I need to find really cheap masks. I don't need a good mask. I mean, I guess I do because I don't like how most of them feel on you, but you go through them like crazy. I don't know where they all are. Well, Paul says he sees them out on the street and everything. I mean, how do they get on the street? Do people just throw them off? Oh, like a place like Walmart where they give them to you for free, probably. These are people who only wear the mask when they go into the Walmart, as opposed to somebody like me in Milwaukee where I have to literally almost virtually, well, any place that I would go into in Milwaukee, I have to wear a mask. It's good because it's enforced. So I can't afford to get rid of it. But let's suppose you live somewhere, then Walmart's the only store in your city that ever makes you put it on. They give it to you and then you just throw it away. Well, I mean, what a pig. You can't just take it to the garbage and throw it away? Paul said you saw him floating in the water. This is what our world has come to. My era, we saw condoms floating in the water. Now we see these stupid coronavirus masks. You bring that up. I don't know if I ever corrected this. I made a comment on the program I get these millennials tell me everything because they can't stop talking about themselves. They all said that I had 2 or 3 people tell me that the dating sites are just dead. Tinder and all that stuff is just dead because of coronavirus. In fact, that's not true. The company that owns most of them is called Match Group. They not only own Match.com, but they own a bunch of these others. I don't know how many and all, and so on. Their numbers have gone to the roof, and their usage is way, way, way up. And when you think about it, and I guess I hadn't thought about it when I made the comment, that makes sense. With people unable to go to work and with bars and restaurants kind of down, it's even fewer ways for people to be able to meet one another, so they've gone onto the dating sites. So that statement that 2 or 3 people told me, it's simply not true. The usage for these social media dating apps and so on is way, way, way up still. I never would have thought the people that I thought were losers would look good in retrospect now that we got to now. I mean, I used to just think it was these people that are running around, having sex with everybody under the sun and just put a condom on and have sex with a stranger. I rolled my eyes. Who would have thought that was the good old days in which, you're disposing of your condom? I understand where it's a piggish thing to do. I understand, though, whether disposing of the condom, dispose of their mask. You can't take that to the trash and put it in the can? What? Paul says prostitution has to be down. Well, I mean, what, you think the city's enforcing the mask rule? They'll let them hook, but not if they don't have a mask on? We can't joke anymore. We did the story yesterday about the saxophone player at the Pfister. The idiot banquet manager told him that he had to put a mask on. He says, I played the sax. How am I supposed to play the sax? You put this thing in your mouth. Oh, we have a rule. All musicians have to wear masks. Well, the guy said all the wedding people just took their masks off, figuring, well, what's the, and I do understand from the perspective of the Pfister, every bar and restaurant now, if not every night, close to every night, has somebody from the health department stick their head in, and they do look and see whether or not there's compliance. And a few places have gotten fines, and a bunch of others have been written up. It seems to me that they're mostly looking at whether or not the staff is in compliance, and so on. Anyway, the point that I was making here on the whole coronavirus situation and the way we've reacted to it and treating it perhaps more gravely than we needed to now that we have this new number that shows that 94% of those that have died because they had coronavirus at the same time that they had a number of other serious conditions. And again, I grant you, maybe some of those people wouldn't have died had they not gotten COVID. Maybe those other serious things they had, they would have lived, but COVID knocked them out. But when you take a look at, and again, this is not a judgment against the people who died of that. The older you are, I'm a guy that, for example, has a lot of things. I've had a stroke. I'm on blood thinners. I'm on this, that, and the other thing. The older you get, the more of these things you're going to have. So that doesn't mean that there's anything that we shouldn't be trying to protect those people, but it certainly shows why the nursing homes were the first place that this thing rolled through. It shows that of all the public officials in the United States, the one who I think was the biggest idiot on coronavirus of all, it's not going to be Fauci. It was that idiot Andrew Cuomo of New York who ordered the nursing homes to accept COVID positive patients. In other words, if you had COVID and you wanted to move into a nursing home, he ordered them to take them, whereas the best thing that you could have done was make sure that no one with COVID ever got into one of those facilities. But again, who lives in nursing homes? Probably the overwhelming majority have serious other conditions that are out there. So since we have the information, if we wanted to use the information properly, we would now process this in and essentially start transitioning in a society toward taking precautions only for those who have other serious health conditions. And you know what? That's doable. Rather than have this one size fit all, shut everything down, which ends up with overwhelming non-compliance. We mentioned the wedding where everybody took the masks off. Paul talks about all the places that he goes to where he doesn't see anybody wearing a mask. That's massive non-compliance because it becomes impractical because people just aren't going to do it. If instead we took the information that we learned, and again, I'm not saying you had to know this February 1st, but we do know it on September 1st. If we adjusted and said, we will strongly urge everyone who has pre-existing conditions to take steps to avoid getting coronavirus. Now, I do understand that they tell you you're not wearing the mask to protect yourself. You're wearing the mask to stop you from getting it to others. And that's one of the reasons that some people don't want to wear the mask. They don't care if they give it to anybody else. The mask doesn't protect you hardly at all. What the mask does is stop you from blowing your snot and blowing your germs onto somebody else who ends up getting it. So those people perhaps might be at risk, but if we understood that it's a limited segment of the population and not the entire population that is at risk of getting this, we would perhaps have a better opportunity to take strong measures to protect that limited group that has a number of conditions without destroying the economy and hamstringing everyone else. To make my point, rather than shut down all the sporting events and the performing arts and so on, a better standard perhaps would be to tell people who, as long as coronavirus is still out there, to tell people who have some serious health problems, maybe this isn't the time for you to go out to things like that. You can't go to a Bucks game. You can't do this, that, or the other thing. But for the people that aren't at risk, let the thing still be available to them. But that would be using common sense, and it would be acting on the knowledge that we have. And it also would mean that people on the left who've been encouraging these mass lockdowns and have been trying to claim that everybody under the sun was at equal risk of getting it would have to acknowledge that they're wrong. Now, as I say, because this is long-term not sustainable unless the symphony's never going to perform again. Unless there's never going to be performing arts, if there's never going to be Broadway, no rock and roll performers are ever going to be able to make millions doing concerts. The movie industry is all going to be straight to video, and there's going to be no movie theater industry. We're never going to travel again, etc. Unless we're just simply going to say that that's the way we want our world to be. At some point, this transition is going to occur anyway, so we may as well start doing it now, given that we have learned. Now, I was making a point that I kind of moved away from, and I want to use it to close off this discussion. This story, this number from the CDC, as I say, was not widely covered in the media. It was in the New York Times, as I said. But it's not been widely covered elsewhere because the media tends to widely cover only the stories that they want to widely cover. And I'm going to use that as my transmission to move into President Trump's news conference that he held at the end of the Kenosha visit. I don't believe we carried it. We should have. Should I criticize our station? I can do whatever I like. I asked you if I should do it. I didn't ask if I could do it. Those are different questions. Should I? I didn't ask you that. I said should. I'm asking in terms of no. I didn't say if you agreed with the criticism. I'm asking you if I should criticize the station. Yes. That's all I was asking. Paul's ordering me to criticize the station. Well, I said, should I? Or you could say, no, you shouldn't. I'm not asking that. I'm asking if you want to hear me criticize the station. I'm not asking if you don't know what my position is. I didn't ask you if we should carry it. I asked you if I should criticize it for. All right. I will. Should I ask the audience? Should I criticize the station? I know what their stance would be. They will all say that I should criticize the station because we should have carried President Trump's press conference. I think we should have carried the whole thing in general. I believe that a station like ours should have a bias toward live programming and not talk shows, but it's a different philosophy. It would mean not carrying some of the hosts that we have on it. I will, for the people who make those decisions here at the station, of which I make the decisions during my show. But during the other shows, that's probably the host. I don't know if it's Vicky's call or Jerry Bott's call, or I don't know who makes those calls, but I would have carried it. Anyway, I watched virtually every moment of President Trump from the coverage that was out there, from when he got to Waukegan to getting up to Kenosha to the touring of the sites and the comments that he was making there, and then the law enforcement roundtable that he held for about an hour starting, I don't know, it began right around 1:30-ish, somewhere in there, maybe 1:45. I want to transition into some of the inane and idiotic questions that came from the media at that event, because it shows again when the media has made the determination of not to cover the news, but to cover the news that they want to cover. I don't want to give away the whole thing, but they kept whining about why the president isn't talking about any of the peaceful protests. It's for the same reason that we don't lock up people who don't commit murder. News Talk 1130 WISN, Mark Belling, late afternoon show. Unless we wake up in Wisconsin and in the United States, there's going to be another Kenosha in a couple of weeks. I don't know which one it's going to be. I don't know if it's going to be because a police officer shoots an African-American man, justified or not, or if it's something else. But this is the future in our country. It's going on all over the places it is, and it appears to be spreading. And there are reasons to believe that the radical organizations that are pushing this are trying to take it away from some of the major cities. This is why you're seeing Portland, Kenosha, Wauwatosa. Who knows what the next one is going to be? But if I had to guess, it's not going to be one of the giant American cities. It's going to be a city like 100,000 or this is where they want to do it. They want to bring this to the parts of America that have not normally seen it. There's a story now widely reported. The majority of the people arrested over the weekend, the last several days, more accurate, the majority of the people arrested over the last several days in Kenosha during the rioting were not from Kenosha or Kenosha County. More than half were from outside. This proves, I think, the point that you have people that are traveling for the purpose of rioting. They aren't rioting where they live. And, many African American leaders have commented on this, and you'll recall how incredibly unpopular the George Floyd protests were in a lot of big cities. In Milwaukee, the majority of blacks were not in support of those protests because they hated the fact that all this crap was going on in their neighborhoods again. They didn't want a Sherman Park all over again. So some of the politicians who represent Milwaukee, they got the wake-up call. They said, let's get the protests out of Milwaukee. Let's take them to Wauwatosa. So there you have David Bowen and Jonathan Brostoff, who represent portions of the city of Milwaukee. They're out there carrying on in Wauwatosa. Likewise, the situation in Kenosha over the weekend. This was, by and large, not Kenosha residents deciding to destroy their own city. It was people who have nothing to do with Kenosha traveling to come into Kenosha to burn down somebody else's town. That's an important fact to recognize because this is kind of a new thing in protesting and rioting. There are many downsides of getting up there in years. Should I list them? The top three. Well, we all know the top three. The ones that are in the middle are. Anyway, there are many downsides, but there are some upsides. Now, one of the upsides is you have a perspective because you've seen a lot of things. One of the downsides with that is that a lot of people don't want to hear it. I mean, when you're that old man talking, well, way back when nobody cares about that. Other than, occasionally it's useful. There is something, I won't say unique, but very new about the current round of rioting in the United States, and I'll share it with you after I share with you the weather. It's going to warm up for the middle of the week before cooling down a bit toward the end of the week. For tonight, a few clouds with a low of 59. Tomorrow, mostly sunny, much warmer than today. We should get back over 80, about 81 for a high. Same thing for Thursday, mostly sunny. It'll be windy, though, on Thursday with a high of 80. Cooler for the weekend. Friday, mostly sunny with a high 72. Saturday looks pretty nice, mostly sunny, high 78. That's great. Sunday, partly sunny with a chance for showers and thunderstorms at a high of 74. Almost every type of rioting that I can think of in my lifetime. And my first memories of riots were, I don't remember the civil rights marches, the Martin Luther King. That was, I was alive, but I don't remember anything about them. I remember the night the King was killed, but I don't have a lot of recollection before that. What I remember were the anti-war protests that included civil rights protests, and I remember in 1967 in particular, the year that America burned, Watts, Detroit, and so on. I was a little kid, but I remember that. And then we had anti-war stuff, and then we've had the environmental movements, and then after something bad happens in a city, the occasional isolated riot like South Central Los Angeles after Rodney King. Until this latest round this year. When there were riots, they were always rioters from the place who lived essentially where the rioting was going on. Why did they riot in South Central Los Angeles? Well, that's the area that was heavily African American. That's where those folks lived. When they had the demonstrations that turned violent in Madison in the 60s. It was students and people who lived in Madison. When we had the riots in Milwaukee, late 60s, there were people who lived in Milwaukee. On and on it goes. People would generally riot in their own city and often riot in their own neighborhood. What has changed here in 2020 is that it's finally dawned on liberals that that's really stupid. Many have commented in the past, for instance, after the Sherman Park shooting, after Sybil Smith, several years ago in Milwaukee, they decided to burn down the neighborhood in which he was killed, but that Sherman Park is a heavily African-American neighborhood. They burned down their own neighborhood. And many of us commented, can you think of anything dumber You're mad about something, so you destroy your own neighborhood. I'm not encouraging the tactic, but it has dawned on liberals that that's a really stupid thing to do, and it was losing them support. If you're an African-American family who lives near one of the 2 police district stations in the inner city of Milwaukee, do you think you wanted to put up with that crap that was going on every night and the wild driving through the streets and so on? No. And they were unhappy. So it's dawned to the radicals, hey, why are we causing mayhem in a community where 90% of the people vote the way we already want them to vote? We got to go somewhere else. So a Kenosha police officer shoots someone. And a bunch of people who have nothing to do with Kenosha get in their cars and drive into Kenosha to burn down Kenosha. That's rather new. We saw in Minneapolis, and even the lefty goofball Mayor Jacob Fry said this. After the first night or two, he said, there are a lot of these people that aren't from Minneapolis. Remember, he initially tried to blame it on white supremacists. And there was a component of that. But there were a lot of outsiders. He said that. Well, how would people automatically know so quickly to come, and how would they automatically go to the same places? There is an organization going on, and whether it's going on in the dark web or wherever, there's organization and communication that is going on here. The man who is believed to be the shooter of the Trump supporter in Portland over the weekend is a member of Antifa. He's been identified by his sister. Antifa, while loosely organized, is an organization that is bent on anarchy. These organizations and these networks have come up with the tactic of having people go from where they currently live and swarm onto specific communities. I believe this is what's happening in Wauwatosa. I'm not denying that some of the people who are marching and carrying on in Wauwatosa live in Wauwatosa. I did not say that. I believe the majority are not from Wauwatosa. We know that there are 2 members of the state legislature that are taking part in these things almost every night. As I said, Bowen and Brostoff. Neither of them represent any portion of the city of Wauwatosa. If Jonathan Brostoff was carrying on and disturbing the peace in his own neighborhood every single night, a number of his residents would be unhappy with him. So he goes into Wauwatosa and causes hell there. This is a more dangerous form of rioting than we have had in the past. Why? Because they have nothing to lose. Remember, when a rioter burns down their own neighborhood, what they have to lose is their neighborhood, and they're also going to be disapproved by many of the people they know that aren't going to want their neighborhood to be burned down. But what does somebody from the north side of Chicago care if Kenosha burns down? You even saw in the rioting in Chicago that destroyed State Street and Michigan Avenue. Those weren't people that lived on the Magnificent Mile and what do they call those areas? River North and the near north side. Those weren't those people getting out of their high rises. Those are people that were coming from the south side and tearing up a different part of the city. Why tear up my own part of the city? This requires a different mindset in combating this. This means that we are not talking about people that are choosing to protest injustice, because that would imply some sort of self-sacrifice. These are people who simply want to destroy other people's homes, properties, and way of life, and will travel to do it, but don't want to accept any of the pain themselves. In a way, it's almost like an invasion by a different army. Kenosha was invaded by non-Kenoshans who came in and burned Kenosha to the ground. If you're going to have that kind of response, and this is one of the points President Trump made, almost always the local police will be overwhelmed. I didn't get the exact number when I mentioned it. I think Kenosha's population is somewhere between 80 and 100,000. It's in that range. The size of the police department in Kenosha, and even if you throw in the Kenosha County Sheriff's Department, and Kenosha County is a very big county. Yeah, it's right around 100. That's the city. And of course, Kenosha County goes on forever. But still, a police department in the city the size of 100,000, and even a sheriff's department in a county the size of Kenosha County, you would need a police department the size of the city of New York to address open urban warfare that's going on. Now, if the only people who demonstrated and rioted in Kenosha were the Kenosha residents, they wouldn't have burned down all those buildings, because not many of the people doing the burning down are from Kenosha. That's why understanding that this is a new thing requires a very different response. It means that you need to understand that these are not protesters. These are insurrectionists who want to burn things down. The incident that occurs is merely the excuse. In other words, let's imagine we're Antifa. Antifa's all over the country. Loosely organized. There's a bunch of guys over here, a bunch over there, so on. How does Antifa decide where to go? Right now, they're just waiting for a cop to shoot a black guy. And that's the signal. They could change the signal to anything. It could be so awful. They could say that anywhere where a Republican, whatever. But they've made that the signal. Cop shoots a black guy. Antifa is going to have that. They don't even need to send out an email. It's just known that's now where you go. Which is why, as I said on the program, in the early stages of the Kenosha thing, when they were underreacting, when Tony Evers pathetically sent in his 125 National Guardsmen, and the mayor of Kenosha, John Anaramian, was sitting in there clueless, not understanding that his city was going to be under siege, that we needed to do what Senator Johnson wanted done and what President Trump wanted done, which is you needed to get hundreds, thousands of federal troops in there immediately, because there was going to be this invasion. This point is critical. The communities that are going to be at greatest risk are the ones even smaller than Kenosha. I won't even use a name here. Don't give anybody any ideas, but let's just think of any community here and away from, say, the Metro Milwaukee area, but close to, say, 15,000. And imagine that a cop there pulls over an African American and rightly or wrongly shoots him. That community of 15,000 has no ability to confront 40,000 Antifa and Black Lives Matter rioters coming in to destroy the city. They just don't. So therefore, knowing that this is the new tactic, that people will travel and go to riot somewhere they don't even live, and then claim they want change, even though they're trying to change something that they don't even live in. The response has to be different. And it means that liberals like Mayor Dennis McBride of Wauwatosa is going to be on my program at 4:30 need to understand that your obligation is to defend your community, often from outsiders who aren't trying to improve the race relations in your community. They just want to destroy your community, and they are using the police issue as the trigger point, the signal as to what community that we go into. If we don't learn this, this is going to get far worse before it gets better. Because, and again, Antifa is a sophisticated organization. They've been around for years. I remember I did a topic about Antifa when I was hosting Rush. I bet it was 8, 9, 10 years ago. It was in there brand new, because I asked Rush's producer, the fellow that he calls most nerdly, James Golden. I said, do you know about Antifa? I'm sure I called it Antifa then, because I was calling it Antifa then. And he'd say, oh yeah, they were, and he of course was on top of it. But it was new enough that I wasn't sure that he knew. This was in their early formations. I don't know if it was Portland or San Francisco. They started forming when they objected to when those international banking, the IMF and all those organizations were getting together. That's where the thing sort of started. They're against this whole globalism thing. Weirdly, they share some viewpoints with the right. But essentially, they're against any kind of concentration of wealth. And that's where the whole thing started. And it started with these tactics in which they made it clear that they weren't interested in peaceful protesting. They were interested in violence. So when you have all these reporters asking Trump, well, but you're not saying anything about any of the peaceful protesting, and Trump just sitting there. I don't have a problem with peaceful protesting. That's why I'm not talking about it. Talking about peaceful protesting today, again, that's like the liberals not talking about the straws in the ocean anymore. We're talking about bigger things. Nobody gives a rat's patoot if 50 people want to walk around on the sidewalk peacefully this afternoon. No one cares. Go ahead and do it. I may not agree with them, but okay, go ahead and do it. People have been peacefully protesting forever. Find an abortion clinic. There's going to be people peacefully protesting it. We are talking about violent insurrectionists who are burning these cities down. This is what Antifa is, and it is certainly what a segment of Black Lives Matter is. We aren't trying to stop the people peacefully walking around. We are trying to stop the people that are burning cities down. We are trying to stop the people that are blocking streets. We are trying to stop the people that are destroying the quality of life in neighborhoods. We are trying to stop the people that are vulgar and loud and rude. We are trying to stop the people who are freaking people out. We are trying to stop the people that are committing arson. That is what the focus is, and that's what President Trump is talking about. President Trump didn't today go to the site of a peaceful protest. He went to Kenosha, a city that is a war zone, because violent protesters burned it down. So anybody asking, why aren't you talking about peaceful protest, is an idiot trying to change the subject away from the fact that the left has either chosen to become violent or is allowing its movement to be hijacked by those who are violent. And given the fact that nobody on the left is criticizing the rioters, and nobody on the left is condemning Tony Evers for blowing this and botching it, and nobody on the left is condemning the folks in Wauwatosa for doing nothing to protect their city, I've got to assume they're all in favor of it. How do you know I don't want the Bears to win the NFL championship? Because I say, I don't want the Bears to win the NFL championship. When's the last time you heard a lefty say, I don't like the rioting they're doing? It doesn't happen. News Talk 1130 WISN, Mark Belling, late afternoon show. I have an important point and a funny story. First, I'm going to give you the Sizzling Summer Cash Contest text-in word for the 4 o'clock hour. The word is rich. R-I-C-H, rich. Remember who Richard Rich was? Well, you know who Richie Rich is, don't you? Richie Rich. Yeah, well, you know the name, but you don't know who that is. Well, that's, yeah, well, I don't know if Richie Rich came from Richard Rich, but Richard Rich was, that goes back to Henry VIII and the guy who became St. Thomas More and all of that stuff. The movie A Man for All Seasons. Watch the movie A Man for All Seasons. A great movie from the... Who started that? Peter O'Toole? Look that up for me. Look up A Man for All Seasons. It's one of the great movies of the 1960s. Like, when I say great, it was, like, huge. I think... Oh, I saw it as a kid. Is it Peter O'Toole? A Man for All Seasons. Just put in A Man for All Seasons star. He has a slower internet connection in there than I do. I think there's some... It is slow, the one that he has in there. Mine is fast, which is, it's mine in my room here is fasted up, and of the two, I would rather have mine be fast than his. Paul Schofield. No Peter O'Toole? Oh, all right. I don't remember it. Anyway, Richard Rich was like, he's the bad guy. He like sucks up, and the next thing you know, he sells up because he becomes rich and powerful. Rich! Text that into 200-200. You'll get a text confirming entry plus iHeartRadio info. Standard data and message rates apply in this nationwide contest. I said that I had an important point to make about this. Given that Antifa wants to riot, and given that the trigger signal to know where to go to riot is cop shoots a black guy, what does Antifa need to have happen? Think about this They need cops to shoot black guys. Let's imagine somehow no police officer in America shoots an African American in the next year. Antifa loses the ability to riot because that's their trigger signal. This is why they will immediately proclaim before any facts are in that a police shooting was terrible and wrong. That we get these instant judgments fueled by irresponsible corporate executives like Michelle Goss of Kohl's, who come out and declare it to be a wrongful shooting before we know. Because if they have to wait for us to get all the facts as to whether or not the shooting might have been justified, then A, you're missing an opportunity to riot, and B, you're not taking advantage of the instantaneous outrage that's out there. So you will always see these people, including the media, jumping on and proclaiming and deciding from the beginning whether or not the shooting was justified or not, because the goal of Antifa is to riot. And the goal, I think, of many in the media is to encourage riot. And sadly, I think based on the way Tony Evers fanned the flames himself, he was someone that apparently was looking for a riot to occur. You can say, well, that's not fair. Tony Evers didn't want there to be a riot. Well, every word that he said seemed to encourage rioting. He immediately came out and fanned the flames, and then he told any rioters that were coming in, I'm not going to have any National Guard there. I'm only going to have 125 the first night. It's almost like he was programmed to have a riot occur. In the same way, his non-response for a week and a half in Madison seemed to be an attempt to encourage rioting. Now to my hilarious story. This is going to become big. California has local ordinances in which they've had places locked down. For example, there are some parts of California that have had businesses open and others that are closed. In San Francisco, all the hair salons have been closed since March. Finally, because San Francisco's numbers have crashed, they're allowing the salons to reopen as of today, but outdoors only. I just can't even fathom getting salon services outdoors. I don't want to be sitting on a sidewalk when there's a reason why you go to these places and nobody's supposed to be able to look in. Although you see these places where the women go, they're all sitting there on the hair dryers over their heads gabbing to each other when they got the curlers on. That's more of a woman thing than a man thing. Well, I take it back. I think about the barber shop when you were a kid. There's two chairs up there and everybody's talking in the room. I guess it's anyway. So as of today, the salons in San Francisco can open for outdoor services only. Guess who yesterday, when the salons were still all to be closed, was caught in an upscale San Francisco hair salon getting a haircut and a shampoo? Nancy Pelosi. This story's breaking right now on Fox News. They've obtained video. They've got video of her. Nancy Pelosi went into a salon and was serviced in San Francisco yesterday, not wearing a mask, by the way, at the same time that all of the salons are to be closed. Now, many people have pointed out, do you think Pelosi's not been getting her haircuts at all? You know, Washington, D.C. has had different rules in San Francisco, and in fairness to Pelosi, there are cities in San Francisco where the salons have been open. But in the city of San Francisco, because it's an extremely liberal city, they've been under total lockdown, yet that lockdown did not apply to her, and she was not at all shy about making sure that she would get serviced by her staff. Her husband's a very rich guy. She's got a ton of money to go in there and be serviced. This is going to be a story that will have legs. It won't have legs in the mainstream media, but you're going to hear about Pelosi getting her illegal haircut. And again, this story's just developing right now. And a lot of the other salon owners in San Francisco, they're furious because they have died. I mean, they've had 6 months of no revenue. Many are going under. And then to see another one of their competitors gets to open up and Pelosi goes and wanders in there because she could even wait a day. And Nancy Pelosi isn't going to want to have her. You think she's going to want to sit on the sidewalk? You know what those sidewalks in San Francisco are filled with? Thousands and thousands and thousands of vagrants. So, that Pelosi hair job. That's not like one of these 15-minute cost cutters things. I mean, she's got that hair kind of boofed up and curved around, and who knows what kind of color is put in there on the whole thing. How long Paul thinks there's extensions in there? There could be almost, I mean, you could dive into this. She might be somebody that's got some sort of like hair from a mink or something worked into the middle of that thing. You could dive in there and I don't even know what you'd find. It'd be like when I was doing my decluttering when I found all of these things. I still have not found my sunglasses. They're lost forever. I've given up on it. I found almost everything else that I thought that I had lost during this, but I've never found the sunglasses. I never lost the Marconi. I told you it was in my bedroom. It's where I've had it. It was in a drawer for a while, but that's where it was. It was never lost. No, I just lost these sunglasses during this all. All right. It's, as I said, Dennis McBride, the mayor of Wauwatosa, is going to be on the program right around 4:30 this afternoon. 4:22 News Talk 1130 WISN. Standing up for Milwaukee, this is the Mark Belling Late Afternoon Show on News Talk 1130 WISN. We have been dealing with, over the last number of months, any number of things that have occurred since the George Floyd incident in Minneapolis. We've dealt with them individually and collectively. I think in order to understand them, you need to take a look at them collectively, but it doesn't change the fact that they're individual situations and each is different. For example, what happened in Shorewood, where there were loud and raucous but largely peaceful protests that culminated in an incident in which a woman got into it with a young African-American teenager and she spit in his face and so on. That was a very different type of incident that occurred in the city of Milwaukee, where there were very loud protests in the middle of the night, people driving on the lawn and so on, but other than one night of looting, were not violent. And it's different from the situation in Chicago, where there's just been anarchy and destruction of the city. And the situation in Wauwatosa has been different. Wauwatosa has had protests night after 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 night for weeks, aimed at one police officer, African-American Officer Mensah, who has been involved in 3 separate police shootings over the last number of years, the most recent earlier this year at Mayfair, when he shot an individual who had fired a gunshot at him who was running toward Mayfair Mall with a loaded gun and an extended with a magazine and 36 rounds of ammunition with him as part of a mob that was trying to charge into the mall. And they have been demanding his scalp, and they appear to be on their way to getting it. My problem with the situation in Wauwatosa doesn't require me to, I don't need to explain my position with my problems with how Wauwatosa has handled this, because I've been going on and on and on about it for weeks. We have been, however, contacted by the mayor of Wauwatosa, Dennis McBride, who appeared on the show early on in this situation after Wauwatosa said that they were going to create a task force looking into policing, which I thought was an incredibly stupid decision to make, given the fact that I think the people that are objecting here don't care about the issue of policing in Wauwatosa. What they are trying to do is destroy Wauwatosa. Well, Mayor McBride disagrees with me on that. We discussed it at the time, and the situation, I think, has degenerated. And as you know, I fear that Wauwatosa is headed toward becoming Kenosha. I believe that you have people from outside Wauwatosa who want to destroy that city, and every day that the city goes by and doesn't shut this down is a day that it gets closer to the day in which Wauwatosa falls apart. Now, over the weekend, there was an incident described on the program yesterday in which a Wauwatosa resident, who's written a letter to Mayor McBride about it, tried to drive up one city street so she could deliver a friend's bike to the friend's house, and she was blocked because there were protesters that were on the street. So she went down several streets and came up another street, and she was blocked again by them. And she just decided that she had enough of it, that she wasn't going to move her car, that she wasn't going to turn around and go back. And she was berated and yelled at by people that were involved. And by the time it was over, she said she was trembling, and she just does not understand why Wauwatosa is allowing this to go on. So with that being the backdrop and where I'm coming from, we have Mayor McBride on the program here. this afternoon. So, Mayor McBride, you asked for the opportunity to come on, and given the fact that most people duck me, I'm more than happy to have somebody who wants to come on and explain his position. So before I get into this with any questions with you, is there just an opening thing that you want to say about what's going on in Wauwatosa, or would you prefer that I just throw some questions at you?
Well, thank you. I do want to start with a few thoughts. The first is I issued a statement on August 14th where I talked about the fact that people have a constitutional right to protest, that we must respect that constitutional right, but that right also comes with responsibilities, as most constitutional rights do. And in this case, we just want to remind people that they need to keep their protest peaceful. Beyond that, and I also mentioned that if people violated our ordinances, those violations would be addressed by our police department. Beyond that, though, I really have to say that what I've been doing with everybody on the right, the left, and the in-between on our political spectrum is to please, everybody take a deep breath. We are in a very difficult situation in America. None of this gets helped by people on either end of the spectrum taking guns out, by people screaming names at each other and all that. There's a lot of emotion on all sides, and I'm asking for people to be peaceful and to respect each other's opinions. That doesn't mean that I condone violent behavior. We haven't had much violent behavior in Wauwatosa. We had one night of violent behavior at Officer Mensa's house. We've had loud behavior, loud protests, but we've only had one night where anything became violent. The other thing I want to say, though, I just want to correct a few facts that you stated at the beginning. The Alvin Cole incident wasn't a mob at Mayfair. It was a few kids. Cole was one of them. He did have a gun. He didn't shoot it at anybody. As he was running away, the police were chasing him. As he was running away, his gun discharged and he shot it himself. He grazed his arm. So he didn't shoot at anybody. His weapon did discharge, which is an important part of the whole discussion. But I just want to make sure that we get some of the facts straight.
Well, I don't believe that characterization is the same characterization that Officer Mensa has given. He felt that.
Well, I can tell you, I've seen the videos, and the district attorney has presented the evidence, shown the evidence to all the parties involved, and so I will just have to say that I've seen the video, so I know what happened.
Well, it'd be nice if the rest of us would get to finally see that video. Why were you allowed to see it?
Because I'm one of the parties. City of Wauwatosa is one of the parties to this discussion, and my understanding is the district attorney will be releasing his findings soon. What soon means, I don't know.
It's been, and maybe to everyone's disadvantage, it's been one of the slowest investigations of all time. The incident occurred in the winter of last year. I mean, if the district attorney needed this long to investigate and make a decision on charges of every shooting in Milwaukee, nobody would ever get charged, but I guess that's a separate question. The concern I have, and I've made this clear, I believe what you have is, in all of these protests, a combination of some people who don't like police and don't like the way we do policing in the United States and are by and large peaceful. And they have been infiltrated or joined by people who just want to cause trouble. And my fear is that Wauwatosa has sent out a signal, at least across the Midwest, that its response is so weak and so tepid that if you come to Wauwatosa, you can do anything. You had a situation in which, with virtually no police involved at all, a guy brought a shotgun to the home of Officer Mensa's girlfriend, fired a shot there after they were hanging around on her property, vandalizing her property, and so on, and with very little resistance that occurred. And even after this is done, there's been no attempt by Wauwatosa to enforce any city ordinances. Now, you say that it's been by and large peaceful. It has certainly been night after night after night lawless. The laws being violated repeatedly, and your community isn't doing anything about it. I dare say
I disagree with that.
Well, I don't believe I could by myself at 9:30 tonight drive down onto, say, Wauwatosa Avenue or one of your streets, turn my car parallel, blare my horn at the top of the lungs, and then scream that Dennis McBride's a rotten mayor and do that for an hour. I suspect I'd be arrested by the police for blocking traffic and disturbing the peace and so on. What you have here is these protesters are doing things that other people aren't allowed to do. There was no permit that was issued to block the two streets that the lady was unable to pass through the other night, and this is because you've chosen as a city to simply let them do it. You can't, people can't walk around in the middle of city streets. They're supposed to walk on the sidewalks. They're not supposed to use megaphones late at night. They're doing these things, and they're doing it to antagonize people and to upset them. That's the purpose that they have, and they don't see your city, Wauwatosa, doing anything to enforce the law.
Well, let me address all this.
I'll let you. I threw a lot at you, so I want you to respond to all those points.
Sure. Thank you. First of all, no one knows about the protests more than I do because I've had at least 15 right outside my house. Some of them have been late at night. No one has been more directly affected by this other than Officer Mensah and his girlfriend, but no one's been more directly affected than my wife and me. So I'm very familiar with the protests. You're right that our police department doesn't have the resources to give a ticket to everybody who violates an ordinance in a protest. We have a suburban police department. We don't have the resources of the city of Milwaukee Police Department. I can tell you that the police department is doing what it can to enforce the law, that sometimes they're able to identify people and they issue citations after the fact, which understandably is not quite as effective as doing it at the time, but it is what they're able to do. And when you mentioned people with a shotgun going to Officer Mensah's house, that person has been charged by the district attorney with 2 felonies. His getaway driver was charged with a felony, and the person who owned the shotgun has been charged. So it's not as if people aren't getting charged when they are committing.
No, but nobody was stopping them when they were doing it. All of that behavior was going on at Mensah's girlfriend's house, who is a police officer from Milwaukee. I'm not going to name her here, but all of that activity was going on, and nobody from the police department, I suspect because there's been a direction from someone, whether it was a chief or someone, to let them do it. They were allowing that home to be vandalized. They were.
I disagree. Again, I disagree. The police brought that situation under control with the help of mutual aid from other departments. So that's another thing that people need to understand here.
It wasn't under control at the time that the shotgun was shot into the house.
It certainly was not. Crimes are often committed before police can control the situation, but then the police came in and controlled the situation. So with the help of mutual aid from other departments, they were able to bring the situation under control. Fortunately, no one got seriously hurt, and people have been charged with felonies for committing crimes. So you're right. I would like to see that every night people who block roads come outside my house, as they often have, and occupy both sides of the street. I wish they would be cited at that point. I will tell you this, that you started your show by saying you're afraid that Wauwatosa could turn into Kenosha. We all have that fear because there are unreasonable people on all sides of this thing. We've seen the Kyle Rittenhouses of the world. We've seen the people on the other side. There are bad people who try to take advantage of emotional situations. What we are doing, though, the police are enforcing the law to the extent that they can. What we don't want to see happen, what we do not want to see happen, is to inflame the situation to the point where people will come in from Illinois, from other parts of Wisconsin, from other states, and engage in the kinds of behaviors on both sides of the issue that we've seen in Kenosha. So this is not a perfect situation. There's no playbook for this, but what we are trying to do is make sure that it remains peaceful. And largely, it's been loud, it's been frustrating, but largely it's been peaceful with one notable exception.
Well, I think that's a misuse of the word peaceful. Loud, raucous, disrupting, scaring people to death isn't peaceful. It may not be violent, but it's not peaceful. Peaceful is walking around with a sign.
It has not been violent.
Right.
Right.
I'll
agree
grant
that,
you, in terms of violence being physical, there was only really the one night. In terms of there not being a playbook, I keep hearing this, we don't want to inflame, we don't want to inflame, we don't want to inflame.
Mm-hmm.
This is the area that I'll use the word violent. I just violently disagree with you on this. The way to bring this under control is to enforce the law aggressively. If you don't have enough police officers, ask Governor Evers to send 300 National Guardsmen in so that you have vehicles to put people in and arrest people en masse when they keep violating the law. I don't think you'd allow a bunch of pro-lifers to go and carry on in the middle of the night like this. I don't think you'd allow a bunch of Donald Trump supporters like I am to carry on and hold a rally at 11 o'clock at night and shoot off fireworks and carry on and rant and rave. I believe in your fear not to inflame the situation. You're showing weakness, and that's why people keep coming in and doing this, because they know that in Wauwatosa, you guys have decided to let them get away with it. The reason Mayfair Mall, in my opinion, has been targeted again and again and again is people run through Mayfair Mall screaming, yelling, banging on the windows and so on. And the worst that happens is that Mayfair puts in a curfew. There are communities where this isn't going on. And I've made the observation that every single city I can think of in the United States that has seen this type of protesting is run by a Democrat. Now, you're elected nonpartisan, but you're a Democrat. Every single one of them. I think a community that cracks down, arrests people, puts them in jail for every single violation of the law and makes it clear that this kind of conduct isn't going to be tolerated has a better chance of getting a lid on it than those that keep bending over and showing weakness. And I think that the original weakness was right after George Floyd's situation, which had nothing to do with Wauwatosa. Heather Kuhl and the Common Council and you put out this resolution. Let's set up a committee to bash the police department. It was an open signal. Hey, come on in. We want to be the piñata that's smashed around all over the place. Don't you think that you started this by going out and targeting your own police department for criticism at a time in which all over the United States, many people were looking for excuses to rip the police?
Mr. Belling, your facts are wrong again. The commission that you're talking about was created last year, not this year. So the commission did say a bunch of things that I think were unhelpful, but the commission was set up last year, not this year. It was not in response.
What was Heather Kuhl's resolution? What was the resolution Heather Kuhl called for, which she wanted to have hearings? She called for hearings on policing in Wauwatosa. That was after George Floyd.
That was one alderperson. Her proposal went nowhere. Now, let me address something else you said. You've been bashing Democratic mayors, etc. Let us not politicize this situation. The worst thing we can do is politicize an emotional moment on the right and the left wings. Bringing politics into this is not helpful. And then you said we're showing weakness. I think we're showing strength. And you're going to disagree, you're going to laugh, and all the rest of it. But the easiest thing is to be a bully. The easiest thing is to come in with a show of force and beat the crap out of people. That isn't helpful. I have been in contact.
I'm not advocating beating the crap out of people. I've advocated arresting them if they're violating the law.
I've been in contact with the governor's office. We are prepared to handle any emergency, but we are not going to call out the National Guard just because it makes people feel good. I've been asked that question by many people. A lot of people on the left want me to do feel-good things. On the right, they want me to do feel-good things. We are not going to do feel-good things. We're going to do intelligent things to make sure that our situation does not turn into something that we're all going to regret.
Well, I mean,
you've gotten frustrating moment. This is a frustrating moment. It is a difficult moment.
It's not a moment, Mayor. It's not a moment. It's months. And it's not getting better. It's getting worse. It's degenerating. You have people in your community that are scared. Now, you use the term like a bully. That's the whole problem with those of you on the left. You believe that enforcing the law is being a bully. I think, I know you would not allow me and a few people who support me to behave this way in Wauwatosa without being punished. This particular group of protesters is specifically being given a pass.
Well, I disagree. Do you know what I'm being called by people on the left wing for enforcing the law? I'm being called a fascist dictator.
Right. I'm not. The fact that they're wrong. The fact that they're wrong again doesn't.
Excuse me. Your opinion has a mirror image on the other side, and what I'm trying to do is walk down the middle so that people on the right and the left remain unified in this city, which is torn apart by politics, by frustration, by the pandemic, by all kinds of things that are afflicting America right now. And it doesn't do anybody any good to lose their temper, to politicize a difficult time in America. It is important for all of us to try to work together to try to lower the temperature so that we can do what we can to get through this. We will get through it. We will get through the pandemic. We will get through this George Floyd moment. We will get through all of these things. But we have the perfect storm right now. And if we don't remain calm, we are not going to get through this in a way that we're going to look back on.
You're referring to maintaining calm. America's burning up, and I'm trying to stop your city from being the next one that burns up, and that requires a determination to enforce the law and show order and not cave into a bunch of people like your buddy Jonathan Brostoff from the east side of Milwaukee, who wouldn't have the guts to wake up the neighbors at 10:30 at night in his own neighborhood to come in and keep harassing the folks in Wauwatosa. The other point, we've been going back and forth on that point, though, and on this politicization thing, it is rich for those of us on the right to suddenly be told that we're not supposed to politicize things when every single problem that's occurred in America has been blamed on us for the last several years. But there is a political component to it, because the side that has the places where the violence and insurrection are occurring are all extremely liberal cities run by liberals. Madison, Minneapolis, Portland, and including Wauwatosa. There is a connection here. The policies that are put in place are being put in place by liberals, and the weak response that's coming is coming from liberals. I'm just telling you, you could end this within a week and your community would be perfectly fine, but some of your buddies on the left wouldn't give you awards anymore.
Mr. Belling?
Yes.
It's easy for you to sit there without having to be in the mayor's chair or the chair of an elected official and say those things, but you and I are going to have to agree to disagree, because I don't think that your proposals would result in peace. I think they would result in more conflict. And my effort here, my daily effort, my 24/7 effort, my 7 days a week effort is to maintain peace in my community. We are not Kenosha. We will not become Kenosha. If we have problems, we will call in the necessary help from the state. It doesn't have to be the National Guard. We can get other help from other departments. We are not going to take rash steps. We are going to make sure that we maintain the peace in our community. That is that was the oath I took. That's
right.
The oath I'm taking now.
Can I respond to that? You use these terms, though, rash steps. Arresting people who are violating the law is not a rash step.
People have been arrested. People have been cited. People have been ticketed. They are getting, the law is being enforced. It's not being enforced, as I said earlier. It's not being enforced to the extent that any of us would like, but that would require much more policing. We do not have a department big enough for that.
But you've also said you don't want to ask for that assistance. You did say you don't want to ask for that assistance.
No, you're twisting my words. What I said was we get mutual aid from other departments. We can't call upon that mutual aid every night. What I'm saying is we are not calling out the National Guard because we don't need the National Guard at this point.
Well, how can you say you don't have enough policing, but you don't need the National Guard?
The National Guard is not a police force.
No, but it could be an organization that could bring in vehicles in which you could put people who've been arrested in and hold them. The problem with arresting someone is it takes officers a long time to arrest one person and process them and so on. The National Guard has shown that it can be of tremendous assistance in places like Kenosha when enough are brought in to do that kind of thing.
In no state will the National Guard be called out when there is no immediate disturbance. This is not the level of disturbance it's not even close, that would merit calling out the National Guard. So even if I wanted to call out the National Guard, I would not get the National Guard. The National Guard is not a police force. It is something that you use in times of emergency. We are not in that sort of an emergency.
I will make a bet with you that if you asked Donald Trump if you could have the National Guard come to Wauwatosa, I think you would get it. But that's a separate question. Anyway,
the governors call out the National Guard, not the president. The president would provide federal agencies, not the National Guard.
what's the end game on this? Because as I say, I believe the people that are raising hell in Wauwatosa get off at waking people up in the middle of the night and yelling and screaming. And this is long beyond Officer Mensa. And it's right now it's just throwing the F-bomb around. Everything's vulgar. It's shooting off some random fireworks and so on. Are you just going to wait till winter and hope that it's too cold for them to continue it? Or is there an end game to stop? Again, I am for legal protests. These protests that are going on are illegal. They're in the middle of the street. They're not with permits. As the lady in Wauwatosa pointed out to me, if you want to hold a block party in Wauwatosa, you got to request it 14 days before the event just to close off one block of the city. Yet you've got block after block after block obstructed every night by people that aren't stopped for doing this. What's the end game?
Well, first of all, I've been treated with vulgarities by people from the left and the right wings. You ought to see my emails. So it's not a great time. I'll tell you what, my mouth would have been washed out with soap many times by my parents for the things that people are saying to me on all parts of the spectrum. But beyond that, what is the end game? The end game is that we are in the unfortunate situation of having a police officer who shot and killed 3 people in the line of duty. That doesn't mean he hasn't been cleared. I'm just saying that there's a fact that we have a police officer like that. That has brought attention and protest to Wauwatosa that we would not have but for that fact. Until we resolve the situation with Officer Mensa, we may not resolve the protest. There is a legal process going forward at the Police and Fire Commission. That's going to take a few months. Cold weather may bring an end to some of this. Who knows? But what we are doing is we are going to continue making sure that the law is enforced while people protest. And we are moving forward with the business of the city of Wauwatosa. And we will continue to do that until the time that these issues are behind us. There's no playbook, as I said. There's no schedule. I can't tell you that a week from Friday all of this will be resolved. At some point, we will get through this. We will get through it by being calm and temperate and making sure that we try to keep the peace in our community and enforce the laws while we do it.
Well, that's what Jacob Fry said, and it was the hope of the Kenosha folks on Sunday of last week that let's not inflame things. Let's not send, Tony Evers would only send out 125 National Guardsmen. I actually hope I'm wrong and you're right, and that this just plays itself out and it goes away and people move on and worry about something else. But I'm very pessimistic about this. I think that there is far more hate among the people that are out there stirring all of this up than you think. And I don't believe that this is equal venom on both sides. I think most people on the right simply want to have peace and calm. We support protesting, but we want the laws to be enforced, and we don't like it when liberal politicians acquiesce and cave in to agitators who are hell-bent on anarchy. And I think against a portion of these people that are hanging out and choosing your community right now are just in favor of anarchy, and they see a soft touch in Wauwatosa. But again, I'm glad you came on, and I hope you're right, and I hope that I'm wrong about this, and I hope you can make fun of me in 6 months and say I told you so. See, nothing bad was going to happen.
I won't make fun of you. We'll just be glad that we got through it, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. So
okay, thank you.
Have a good day.
Sure thing. That's Mayor Dennis McBride of Wauwatosa, obviously. He and I don't agree on anything with regard to his approach, but I tried, while challenging him in his points, to allow him to have his say. News Talk 1130 WISN. Mark Gulling, late afternoon. In a few moments, I'll give you the Citizen Summer Cash Contest. Text in word for the 5 o'clock hour. I know there's a lot to take in there. We had the mayor of Wauwatosa, Dennis McBride, on the program. And rather than go back and forth and make all the arguments again that I made with him, I just want to focus on one of the comments that he made, in which he said, well, it's real easy for you to sit here and say all of these things, and I got to sit in the chair and do it. Well, that's true of every topic that I talk about. Yeah, it's easier for me to sit here and shoot off my mouth than it is to do it. It's easier for me to sit here and, comment on the Milwaukee Bucks performance in the fourth quarter last night than actually go out and play an NBA game. That's kind of a no kidding. However, it doesn't mean that the comments that I'm making are wrong. You can hear from the mayor that he is finding this very, very difficult, and there's a reason why he's finding it very, very difficult. It is very hard for a liberal to show strength and enforce the law. It just is. Because his inclination is to treat everybody equally, as he states, as if the people that are griping at him from the right, like I am, are in the same category as the people that are out there on the left who hate police officers, vandalized a young woman's home, and shot a shotgun into her house. He acts as though it's all an equivalent thing, so it becomes a hard thing for him, a lifelong liberal, to crack down and enforce the law. He used the verb bully. He used it as a verb, or maybe used it as a noun. He said he didn't want to go out and either bully people or be a bully, and use tactics as if enforcing the law is being a bully. Now, one of the points that I tried to make, and I don't think the mayor wanted to hear it, is I don't think a bunch of people with any particular thought, pro-police, let's suppose they decide Wauwatosa is going to pay for being so soft in all of this and for trying to fire Officer Mensah. Could a bunch of people, just 10 people, go out to Wauwatosa from the right, NRA types, whatever, and just block a street and tell some poor women that they got to go right, they got to go the other way? Or, in the middle of the night, go to somebody's house and yell and scream and blow off horns and shoot off fireworks? And the answer is no. I don't even think I could just stand in the middle of the street of Wauwatosa by myself. Some cop would tell me to move. This group of protesters has been given preferential treatment. They are allowed to behave the way they are behaving, and because they know that they're allowed to behave that way, they carry out all the more. There's been this belief from the beginning in cities across the country. You've seen it in Portland and Seattle that if we give the protesters, the demonstrators, and in the case of Portland, Seattle, and other places, rioters, if we appease them, this will satisfy them and it will stop. This implies that they believe that they think that these individuals are reasonable. They're not reasonable. Mayor McBride is a friend of Jonathan Brostoff, or at least he campaigned with him when McBride ran for the legislature. Jonathan Brostoff is a member of the state legislature who keeps driving over from the east side of Milwaukee to raise hell in Wauwatosa. He's not a reasonable guy. He enjoys antagonizing people who live in Wauwatosa. And if he thought Brookfield would show the same weakness, I'm sure he'd love to go to Brookfield. And I'm sure a lot of these liberals would love to go to Oconomowoc if they could get enough gas in their car. They've chosen Wauwatosa because Wauwatosa has put up no resistance. Now, as I say, there is a weather component to this. It's hard for me to imagine that you're going to get a lot of people who want to walk around when it's 14 below zero. But we're a long way away from that. And there's every reason to believe that there's going to be an incident in which the police have to use force against someone in Wauwatosa. They might have another issue at a mall, or there might be somebody pulled over for drunk driving who's African-American and resists, just the kind of domestic garden variety situations the cops deal with all the time. And if it becomes a trigger point where, again, that signal is sent that I've referred to in other cities where just instantly people come in from all over the country the instant that police officers use force anywhere. And again, it doesn't matter whether or not the police officer is white or not. The Wauwatosa situation involves a black police officer. This is going to come to a head again. And the word is out that Wauwatosa is a community that allows you to raise hell and doesn't protect the residents and neighbors of the city. Now, the mayor, well, I got people on the left who say the opposite. Well, doesn't mean I'm wrong. The fact that it may be easier for me as a talk show host to say that than it is for him as a mayor to do it, I think that that's a function of it is very hard for liberals to show strength and show responsibility and enforce the law. It's against the nature of people like this on the left. It certainly was against the nature of Jacob Fry in Minneapolis, which is why he ordered police to leave a precinct station, giant precinct station, and they burned it to the ground. It was against his nature to immediately bring in the National Guard the 2 nights after the George Floyd incident when they burned down a number of buildings and stop it. It was against the nature of Tony Evers to get 3,000 troops into Kenosha the night after the shooting of Blake in Kenosha, and as a result, hundreds of buildings were damaged and at least 150 were totally destroyed. Had there been a large show of force that was willing to use all force necessary to enforce the law, that wouldn't have happened. But it's against the nature of people, so of course it's hard for them to do it. And of course it's easy for me to say it. The reason it's easy for me to say it is I believe it. He doesn't believe it. He wants to be nice and reasonable to people who aren't nice and reasonable. And I'm sure he doesn't like my criticism. But I'm not going to go to his house in the middle of the night and yell and scream at him and throw the F-bomb at him. And I'm not going to go to anybody else's house and do that. I enjoy going to your house and doing that, except I'd be too lazy to drive all the way to the woods and do that in the middle of the night. I mean, this notion that this is all just kind of like an equal thing. You have unreasonable people on the right demanding the law be enforced, and unreasonable people on the right who support Donald Trump. And then equally unreasonable people on the left who are supporting Antifa and want anarchy, as if this is some sort of an equivalent thing. It may well be that those of us on the right who want us to enforce the laws we have in this country for 250 years are actually right about it. And as for there is no playbook on this, there is a playbook. There's a reason why we haven't been in this situation prior to 2020. Even when we've had riots in the past in the United States, they were resisted. And there were attempts by police officers in those communities to enforce the law. And in each instance where it was ended because the force was greater than the disruptions that were brought forth. So there. 5 o'clock word. Sizzling Summer Cash Contest. Texted word for this hour is... Plus, it was hard for me to do the interview because you kept yelling in my ear. Paul's all upset with the mayor's saying, so he's yelling and screaming in there. And, you know, how am I supposed to concentrate when you're ratting from... Paul said he's sorry, but he was upsetting him. Well, he is just like Evers. And Tony Evers won't come on the show. McBride did come on, and he deserves credit for that. He wanted to come on. But he's the same. They're liberals. That's the way they think. And they want to put out this notion of reasonableness, and they never think that anything bad is going to happen because they do not understand that a huge segment of the American left is violent, uncivil, anarchistic people who can't stand police, who can't stand order, who can't stand property, who can't stand America. They've made it clear. They think that we are a racist, immoral, ugly, awful, rotten nation. They hate us to the core. They represent a small minority of this population, but this is largely who's out there. A couple of them are elected officials in the city of Wauwatosa. You have an anti-American, anti-police radical in Heather Kuhl and a couple of others that are close. You've got a member of the state assembly, Robin Vining, who has been in favor of and supportive of the anti-police demonstrators. She didn't shoot the shotgun through the window of Officer Mentz's home, but she is somebody who has supported those protesters from the very beginning. And to love it and say, well, everybody, you got people on the right who want this and people on the left, just put you in a position of apparently saying that you're not going to decide whether or not you're going to come down on any side. And the side that I want them to come down on is maintaining order. It has to be the highest priority of a free society. You cannot have protest and dissent, which I support. My show is protest and dissent. There is no one more supportive of free speech, protest and dissent than me. I support protest and dissent, but you cannot have it unless you enforce order. Because if you just have protest and dissent with no order, there's anarchy and chaos. There have to be limits and restrictions and rules by which you express your protest and dissent. Paul said he wants to please both sides. Well, the problem with that, as I say, is the one side is violent, unreasonable, and anarchistic and is not pleasable. They do not want to be pleased. They want to burn the whole damn thing down. He ran to run the government of the city of Wauwatosa. By definition, that is an ordered structure. And if he wants to be on the side of the anarchists, he needs to quit as mayor and join them. But since he doesn't, they have to take some step to enforce order. And the reason is, I don't want to be a broke record. The reason this keeps going on night after night after night after night in Wauwatosa is Wauwatosa has made the decision not to stop it. And you've heard the mayor say that they don't intend to stop it. They just hope it all works out. And in observing all over the country where things have gotten worse, I take a look at Portland where for years now it started slow and is built to the point where Portland and San Francisco are probably the two most unlivable cities in the United States of America right now. And in the state of Wisconsin, earlier this week, Kenosha was the most unlivable place in the United States of America. Kenosha can come back if Kenosha learns lessons here from this situation. But nobody should have to go through this, and nobody should have to be led by leaders who, when they see that a war is coming when troops are invading, as they were on Sunday and Monday of last week, to have a governor like Tony Evers who did nothing. And again, perhaps I'm wrong, and perhaps this will all die out in Wauwatosa, and eventually people will move on, that Vaughn Mays will find another city to bother, and Jonathan Brostoff and David Bowen will go somewhere else, and it'll become somebody else's problem, and then that community is going to have to decide if they're going to put up with 4 months of crap as Wauwatosa has. I hope that is what happens. But it's not the way it's been playing out anywhere, because I understand what the motivation is. The motivation is anarchy, and anarchy by definition is the opposite of order. Anarchists want anarchy. That's why they call themselves anarchists. And Antifa is an anarchistic organization. Did I give you the word? No, I didn't. Thanks! T-H-A-N-K-S, thanks. Text that into 200-200, and can we do now in 6. You get a text confirming entry plus iHeartRadio info, standard data, and message rates apply in this nationwide contest. Now, the mayor doesn't like the fact that I pointed out that every city that this has occurred in has been a Democratic-run city. He says that's politicizing. No, it's an important observation. It means that the objections are the greatest in the communities in which they've been getting their way all along. And secondly, it means that the protests and demonstrations and violence are occurring in communities that are choosing not to try to stop it. We don't know what would happen if in a staunch Republican area, and again, I don't want to name a city, but there are many cities that you can think of here in Wisconsin and across the United States, medium-sized, smaller-sized cities that are overwhelmingly Republican. If you just grab one of them and let's imagine something happens, a police shooting or some incident, and they come in and they try to create disturbances and burn the city down, whether or not those communities would just roll over and do nothing as Kenosha did, or whether or not they'd make demands. If, for example, in Community X in Wisconsin that's run by more conservatives, if there was an incident, would they ask the governor to send in 2,500 National Guardsmen and ask the president to come in? Or would you pull a cruiser and Antaramian and Kenosha and sit back naively and hope for the best and let your city be burned to the ground? We don't know. But I would think in the conservative community they would want to respond with force to protect the citizens of their community rather than essentially stand back and allow your community to be euthanized as you kill yourself, as occurred in Kenosha. Tell people to stop bugging me about the Kentucky Derby as long as we're at it. Can you do that for me? You're being bugged about it too. Tell people to stop bugging me about it. What? Staff members. Paul, when have I ever put the Kentucky Derby picks up before Thursday of the week of the race? Never. Then tell people, what's today? Tuesday. Then tell people to stop bugging me. Are you going to do it? Well, I don't know, but I'm tempted not to. I'm always tempted. 11:30 WISN North Carolina late afternoon show. We talk about not politicizing things. The only time people on the left don't want to, quote, politicize things is when their side isn't working. If there's a problem in the United States, it's always politicized right now, and it's blamed by the media and the left on Donald Trump. When there's a problem, however, in liberal communities in which their response doesn't seem to be working, like the insurrection going on in American cities right now, those of us who criticize it are accused of politicizing it. In fact, the political process is the only process we have in America for citizens to express their input and their viewpoints. I, on the program yesterday, without fully explaining my position, commented negatively on, I think, a well-intentioned but very stupid attempt to try to launch a recall campaign against Tony Evers. I think what happens here is some people get caught up and get emotional and either aren't sharp enough to think about things or are simply misdirected individuals. In thinking this through, I have decided that I was too nice on the people that are proposing the recall. The fact that they're well-intended doesn't mean that we should stand by and allow stupidity that will occur that is going to get Joe Biden elected president of the United States. The way to gain power in the United States of America is to win elections. Elections are often a choice of the lesser of two evils. In some cases, like the primary election that we had for the Congress here in Jim Sensenbrenner's seat, it's the greater of two strengths, but it doesn't always work out that way. It's a choice that's made. Primary elections, there's more often you get to choose between a number of people that you agree with and find the stronger one. The general election is which you end up making a choice. It is the only pathway to power in the United States of America. If you don't win elections, you can't get anything that you want done. Now, there's no guarantee if you win an election, you will get something done. But if you lose all of them, you won't get anything done. The reason that America's cities are all screwed up is they are run entirely by liberals. Almost every major American city of size has an extremely liberal mayor and an extremely liberal city council, and many of them are in states with extremely liberal governors and extremely liberal state legislatures. These cities are being run into the ground with terrible policies that are in place. They are a consequence of elections mattering. Those who disagree with these policies, unfortunately, are rather powerless to do anything about it. A conservative, for example, in the city of Chicago, can speak out and raise his voice and try to enlighten people and can try to sway the debate at least a little bit, but has no power because conservatives haven't won any elections in the city of Chicago. Liberals have chosen to elect more liberals to run their cities, and we see the result of it. We have a presidential election coming up. And it is critical that all of us on the right focus our attention not just on getting President Trump reelected, but on keeping the United States Senate, which isn't an issue here in Wisconsin. We don't have a Senate race this year, but perhaps regaining control of the House of Representatives. You can get a lot more done if President Trump is elected and he has a Republican Congress than what he's had to deal with so far. And if Joe Biden and the Democrats win and take the Congress with them, our country as we know it is over. To have people go through the Herculean effort of organizing a recall effort when those people ought to be focused on getting people out to vote and early vote and getting information out there on the important elections that we have coming up is like somebody who brings a football to a baseball game. Furthermore, if a recall is established against Tony Evers, it would mean that he would stand for re-election probably in about June. As it is, he already stands for re-election in November of 2022. The way the recall process works is after you get 2 months to get enough signatures on the petition. After that, the petitions have to be certified. After that, you have a filing period in which for about a month to 45 days, candidates have a right to file to run. After that, you have about a month or two before the primary election on the Republican side and the Democratic side. And after that, you've got about 6 more weeks between the primary election and the general election. You're well into the middle of next year. You're not exactly getting an instantaneous response. Worrying about an election that you would be holding in June of next year rather than the defining election of our time in which one side, the Democrats, have been hijacked by radicals and are putting up a half-senile opponent running against the most important and best president of the United States in at least 40 years since Reagan and perhaps longer, and focusing on something else is, nicest way to say it is, missing the point altogether, but there's a second point that needs to be made. I recall only 2 short years ago, right around this time in 2018, when all these people were wringing their hands, they didn't like Scott Walker about this, and they wish that he had put a casino in Kenosha and that, and sitting on their hands and crabbing about this, that, and the other thing, and as a result, we've got the very governor that you're now determined to recall. If people had put the effort into stopping Tony Evers from winning in the first place that they want to put into throwing him out after he's in, it's a lot easier to just stop these guys from getting in the first place. And if you think you want to recall Evers, what do you think you're going to want to do with President Kamala Harris in about a year and a half? You need to focus on the things that are in front of you that are important. I staunchly oppose Tony Evers, and he's been about as bad as I thought he was going to be. And if anybody's interested in starting a recall effort, I would say the time to do it would be after the November election is over. But it is a terrible misuse of priorities when we have an election that will define the future of our nation in front of us now, than to start the process to have an election occur in 8 or 9 months, an all-consuming process that requires massive manpower. Furthermore, the amount of money that would have to go into paying the people to organize the recall and You've got some Republicans that are looking at running for governor. Their entire timeline is set up to run for 2022. They're not prepared to run in the middle of 2021. Let's say Becky Clayfish, for example, runs. I know her whole focus is to try to raise enough money to have it going by 2022. They're not even ready. Not to mention the fact that the dumbest thing that the Democrats did during the Scott Walker period was recall him early in his governorship. When it backfired, it helped guarantee, remember, he had only a token opponent when he ran for a full second term against Mary Burke. It guaranteed that he would win the next time around. It is a bad idea. I understand that people are well-intentioned. The way to stop Evers is to try to argue and defeat him, but to try to do a recall 2 months before a presidential election is nincompoopery. And I'm sorry if that insults people, because I know that they're well-intentioned, but it is a bad idea, and no, I am not in favor of it, and I would encourage people to not take a part in it. And there are other ways to deal with Tony Evers right now, but having a Republican Congress and getting Donald Trump elected and stopping Joe Biden and Kamala Harris from bringing Antifa into the leadership of this country is my highest priority, and I choose to be not distracted with trying to set in motion a process that would allow us to have another election for governor in June of next year. You agree with this, by the way, or not? I just mispronounced Antifa and I'm now good. I just decided I'm going to call Antifa whatever I want to call it. And why should I given the fact that Kamala Harris changed her own pronunciation a few years ago, why should I have to say it the way she wants to say it? That's your big response? Yeah. I mean, well, why not? Let's do a recall of Tom Barrett then, and then recall McBride and Wauwatosa. Just recall all these people because you're all too lazy to stop these goofs from getting elected in the first place. But I'm not saying it's not a place for this. It's not a place for that tactic. There was a place for that tactic, but the timing of this is really, really stupid. And it just, as I say, you're talking about, instead of campaigning for an important election, putting all of your efforts into an election that would occur in the middle of next year, and frankly, you're probably going to lose. Probably going to lose. I don't think any Republican is ready. What do you think it'd take to beat Tony Evers? 25 million? Try to raise that money when right now Donald Trump and all the candidates for Congress and the Senate are raising money. You're not going to do it because the donors... Whereas Evers, his sole priority, and the Democrats, they're gearing up to raise the money for their campaign. They got nothing to give. It would not work. It's counterproductive. And in the end, as I say, I just think it's stupid. And again, the fact that the people are on my side and they're stupid, I mean, I guess it would be like if Mike Budenholzer did something as coach of the Bucks that I thought was stupid. I still want the Bucks to win, but it was... I don't blame anything about his coaching in the fourth quarter. I think I know what's wrong with the Milwaukee. Yeah, that's not why the Milwaukee Bucks didn't win. The Milwaukee Bucks didn't win because they've had their heads up their butt ever since they got down to that bubble. They have not gone down with the same passion. And you got a team that has, other than Giannis, a bunch of players that are more interested in social agitation than they are in winning basketball games. And the reason that the loss of Eric Bledsoe is so critical is George Hill can't penetrate, and George Hill just wants to rip the police and not stand for the national anthem. And I've felt all along that the NBA championship in this bubble is going to be won by a team that would surprise everyone, because I think most of the main contenders lost their edge, and there's going to be some team that's down there focused on basketball, and they're going to win the whole thing. And maybe Miami therefore wins the East, and maybe who knows who's going to win the West and what it's all going to be. But I thought that it was an unmotivated team that isn't sharp, that was not playing with passion, that has all sorts of priorities other than winning, with the exception of Giannis, who I think is obsessed with winning. I think the result of all of this is that it is highly unlikely that Giannis is going to long-term be a member of the Milwaukee Bucks. I think he's going to be showing frustration at the lack of commitment of some of his teammates to win a championship. Furthermore, I just think a year and a half of not selling tickets, the Bucks are not going to financially be in a position where they're going to want to commit $200 million to any particular player. And, the impact of this whole shutdown on sports franchises is going to be worse again in the small markets than the large markets, because the small markets are the ones that don't have the same margin for financial loss that the large markets do. The large markets, when you flip the switch back on, remember their local TV contracts and so on are enormous Whereas in Milwaukee, they're not. Milwaukee, you depend far more as percentage of your revenues on your ticket sales, and so on. All right, that's enough on that. 5:35. Well, no turnovers. That's what happens when you don't have your point guard playing. And what does anybody know when Bledsoe's going to be back? I didn't even know he was hurt. On the other hand, I barely know when these games are being played. I mean, everybody's asked me, are you in it? I said 50 to 55%. That's about where I'm not at zero like a lot of people are, but I'm way behind, and it's not like it normally is. 50%. That's about where I am. Where are you? 50%? 35. No. Ask John Wyatt what he is. Oh, that's right. He's out there inspecting a screwdriver. Standing up for Milwaukee, this is the Mark Belling Late Afternoon Show, News Talk 1130 WISN. I'm not going to take questions, I'm just going to answer them because people keep asking me questions. I'm just going to answer them now, and if you didn't ask the question, it's too late because I already have the questions that I'm choosing to answer. First, Mark, why does the stock market keep going up when the economy's in tatters? Well, I've mentioned this a few times. There's an old guy, he's dead now. He used to do a TV commercial. His name was Zweig. He was on Wall Street Week a lot, and I guess he did a newsletter or something or another. And he'd advertise his newsletter on TV in the 80s and the 90s, and he said, I have two sacred rules. Don't fight the Fed and don't fight the tape. I remember that because it just stuck with me, and it turned out to be right. His point was, if the Federal Reserve is determined to have something happen, it's like trying to put your body in front of a semi-truck and trying to stop the thing. And the other thing is don't fight the tape. What he means by that is if the market is going down, get out of the way. It's going to keep going down. And if the market is going up, don't try to get it to stop. At some point, it will stop going up, and that'll be a time perhaps not to be in it. In other words, he believed that the momentum of the thing kind of feeds on itself. This is why we have stock markets that are very, very volatile. When they go up, they can go way up, and when they go down, they can go way down. Over the overall long-term trend, of course, the trend line is up with zigs and zags, but the zags up are always better than the zags down, at least so far in our history. That might come to an end, but who knows? So I think that the stock market's going up because the stock market's going up. I also think that we're seeing a change in our economy, that we are becoming a much more tech-driven economy. And some of these tech companies have now gotten to the point of being extreme monopolies, which allows them to be staggeringly profitable. You have a remarkable percentage of all of American corporate profits bottled up in 8 or 9 companies. Because many of the tech companies are run by liberals, they haven't been that much in the crosshairs of the left. But the left are the ones more so than those of us on the right who generally object to monopolies. That's an area where I break away from some total free market conservatives. I believe that monopolies are not competitive. I believe in a competitive marketplace. And I have supported, in very limited cases, the use of antitrust laws when I think antitrust violations are going on, in which companies are abusing their monopolistic position to interfere with competition. I think one of the industries that this is going on and has been going on for some time is in sneakers. Nike has gotten away with murder because of their, not monopoly, but domination of that market. Because Nike backs liberal causes, liberals have been quiet about it. Nike is essentially now, I think, nothing more than a mouthpiece for China, given the fact that while Nike claims it's an American corporation, everything Nike makes is in China, and Nike's workforce is primarily a Chinese workforce. Likewise, with regard to the tech companies, these are companies that have become extreme monopolies. Alphabet, the parent of Google, is a monopoly. I think it's a great company and a well-run company, but it's a monopoly. Apple isn't a monopoly, but it is extraordinarily dominant in becoming, Apple is the largest market capitalization corporation in the world. Microsoft is close to a monopoly. So Amazon is getting to the point of being a monopoly, in which it's just the overwhelming dominator of online retailing of all forms. And now, I think what's Amazon is they 1, 2, or 3. They're somewhere in the top 3 in terms of the cloud, which is going to be the entire future of information commerce and so on is cloud-based technologies. So these companies that, without regard to the economy that we are in, as the economy is changing and they dominate like 50, 60, 70, 80% of their areas, they're making all the money. In the meantime, try to find a Milwaukee restaurant that hasn't closed. They're closing like crazy right now. There are so many industries that are dependent on people going out and traveling or going out and having a good time or doing this, that, or the other thing. They're going under. But, a Milwaukee restaurant isn't on the stock market. So the stock market and the companies that are there are separate from the remaining, the regular old economy. That's my answer to that question. The next question. Mark, how come we haven't seen any presidential polls the last few days? Well, that's a really good question, isn't it? Rasmussen is alleging that the polls are being suppressed. Rasmussen is a major pollster, and he's commenting on why none of his competitors have come out with a poll since the Republican convention ended. Normally, there's a bump for each party after the convention is over, and normally there would therefore be a bump for President Trump since he just held his convention. Are we not seeing polls because Trump got a bump? I don't know. But I know who the best political analyst in the United States is. Do you know who the best political analyst in the United States is? Mark Belling. I'm second. You know who's better? I'm dead serious about this point, and I hope people actually learn from the point I'm about to make. Best political analyst in the United States is Donald Trump. He sensed back in 2015, as he was plotting this run for president, he sensed that there were tens of millions of Americans who felt alienated from the political process, who felt as though our country was not listening to them. He campaigned on issues and a platform that was unique to both the Republican and the Democratic Party. The thing that's so fascinating about Democrats hating Trump is the Trump platform that he ran on in 2016 was about 40% Democrat stuff. 60% Republican, but 40% Democrat stuff. The opposition to all the wars in the Middle East, that was primarily a Democratic issue. The opposition to trade with China and these international trade deals, primarily a Democratic issue. Now, there are other issues, enforcement of the border and so on. That was, back in the 90s, a Democratic issue, and it became a Republican issue. Some of the other things that he ran on, deregulating the economy and so on, those are Republican issues, but 40% of the stuff was stuff that Democrats would support. Trump believed that this was a winning platform, and Trump also believed that there were Americans who would feel comfortable with a guy like him as president. Nobody else thought this. Not me, nobody. Trump figured it out. And Trump's instincts have been outstanding. The one thing that I think has flummoxed the president is, I think, just given the fact that he's always been able to win people over, I think he thought he'd be able to win over some of the people that he hates. And he's realized that he can't, so instead he's trying to play to his base. Anyway, the president, he puts out these tweets, and the only time people pay attention to him is when he does one of these supposedly outrageous tweets. Every now and then, and you can tell, Trump is controlling the Trump Twitter account. There are all these others, Trump campaign and so on. When these things come off of that real Donald Trump, that's him. And they're never going to take it away from him. He put out a day ago a fascinating tweet analyzing Joe Biden finally leaving Delaware. Now, as you probably know, Biden went yesterday and gave that speech. Did you dub that, by the way, for me? Play it right now. For those of you who missed the Joe Biden speech, here is a very good summary of Joe Biden explaining what he was talking about.
COVID has taken this year, just since the outbreak, has taken more than 100 years. Look, here's the lives. When you think about it.
Well, now that was, Paul, that was unclear to me. I need perhaps to hear it another time to try to fully grasp what Joe was saying. Play it again.
COVID has taken this year, just since the outbreak, has taken more than 100 years. Look, here's the lives. When you think about it.
Think about it. I am. Now, the amazing thing is he's reading that off a teleprompter. Either he's got the oddest speechwriter of all time or Joe Biden can't read anymore. Anyway, He gave that speech in Pittsburgh, which isn't far. I mean, Delaware and Pennsylvania are near, but Pittsburgh's on the other side of the state. It's the farthest he's traveled on the campaign in 7 months. Trump put out a tweet after this. And I think this analysis from Trump is, again, he's ahead of everyone. Listen to this. This is President Trump's tweet. Joe Biden is coming out of the basement earlier than his hoped for 10 days because his people told him he has no choice. His poll numbers are plunging. Going to Pittsburgh and then back to his basement for an extended period. His problem is interesting. This is what Trump. His problem is interesting. He must always be weak on crime because of the Bernie Sanders radical left voter. If he loses them, like crooked Hillary did, he is toast. And many will vote for me because of trade. Bernie was good on trade. Joe must always be weak on crime. What great analysis from Trump on the motivation. President Trump is saying Biden has to be weak on Trump because that's what the lefties want. And if he loses the lefties, if they turn away and they don't go with him, they might end up with him, Trump, because they agree with the president on the trade issue. So the president's belief is the reason that Biden came out of the basement and went to Pittsburgh is because the poll numbers that the Biden campaign has crashed over the weekend and they felt the need to change strategy and get him out of there. I don't know. But that's an interesting take from President Trump, who I think is just, he's good at that. The sizing things up, and he's also really good at explaining it in 2 or 3 sentences. I'm very good at explaining it in 4 hours. News Talk 1130 WISN. Mark Belling, late afternoon show. Going to give you in a few moments here the 6 o'clock hour where it's Sizzling Summer Cash Contest. I said, I have questions. Mark, the Kentucky Derby is this weekend. Are you going to put out your picks? That question, 19,000 people. Another one coming up frequently with the OTB at Potawatomi and all these OTBs closed. How do we bet? All right. I think I'm going to do Kentucky Derby picks, but I am not going to do the big, long, extensive thing we've done in the past. On the Belmont Stakes, for example, the only Triple Crown race run so far, I basically put an order and a brief analysis, my top 4 or 5 horses. That's all I'm going to do for this race. There isn't as much interest, and I don't have the desired time, effort. I'm overwhelmed right now to write out an analysis of each horse and so on. But I will try on Belling.com to get something up no earlier than Thursday. Maybe not even till Friday. The race isn't until Saturday. They did draw the field today. One interesting note on the Kentucky Derby. This is likely to have the most overwhelming favorite in the race in decades. I think the last time a horse was less than 4-5 was Honest Pleasure in 1976. Tis the Law is probably going to be about 3-5. In fact, I think he's 3-5 on the morning line. He's not only but the dominant 3-year-old, the second best horse got hurt this week and isn't running. And there's nobody close to him. I mean, this horse named Art Collector that some people thought could win, he's not running in the race. So Tis the Law is an overwhelming favorite. I believe, if just by virtue of the things that you consider in horse racing, he's an extremely vulnerable horse. The problem is nobody else looks good enough to beat him, but he's due to run a clunker. So I'll go through it and I'll try to come up with something, but it'd be folly really to think that anybody would beat him. But just because you think he might be the likeliest winner, he might not be the best bet. A horse that's 3-5 that is likelier to win than a horse that is 15-1. That 15-1 might still be a better bet. You don't need to be right that often on a 15-1 shot. And for those of you who know anything about horse racing, for example, do you know what win, place, and show means or not? Yeah, but do you know what it's like? If you bet a horse to place, when would you win money? Well, second or first. If you bet a horse to win, he's got to win. If you bet a horse to place, first or second, you get paid. If you bet the horse to show, you get the same if it finishes first, second, or third. But many people do is bet a horse to win, place, and show, so they would collect all 3 bets if he wins, and so on. There will be horses that finish second and third in this race that will play more to place and show or to show than the winner is going to play to win, place, and show, which is something that you need to consider when making these types of wagers. As for the second question, horse race betting is legal in the United States. It's not like sports betting, which is still in this vague area and so on. It's legal. And there are a number of online sites in which you can legally bet. I do not endorse any of them. They're easy to find. Just Google online horse race wagering, and you'll see them all come up. Do not use one that is not based in the United States. The ones that aren't based in the United States are not necessarily legal, and your money isn't commingled into the racetrack pool, and you have to worry about being paid. There are various very large companies, and without endorsing any of them, twinspires.com, expressbet.com, nairabets.com, drf.com, and many others that are out there that do this. They all work. They all seem fine to me. You link it up to your bank account. You can make a deposit. The money's in there within 90 seconds. And if you want to do a withdrawal, it usually takes a day or two to get the money back, and very user-friendly to use. But they are the only way to bet on this race. There's a couple of OTBs down in Illinois that are open, but there's no fans allowed at the Derby. There's extremely limited fan attendance at the Arlington track in Illinois, and the OTBs in Wisconsin here at the Indian casinos, I believe all of them are closed. So that if you have an interest, that is the only way legally you can do it. Of course, you can bet with a friend and do whatever you want. I want to share with the audience, did that sufficiently answer that question, do you think? Or do you think people will still ask me that question over and over about how to bet on the Derby? You have to do it online, bet with an American-based company, and it is legal and it is safe if you use one of the larger companies. And again, I endorse none of them, but all those that are really, you could tell who's big just by looking at their thing, and so on. An interesting piece appeared in the Washington Times a week ago, written by Rick Green. And the thing that's interesting about it is this was written before the Kenosha riots. He predicted that the riots would be moving to the smaller cities. He also predicts that it's going to get worse in the United States. He believes we're going to see insurrection in medium-sized cities. I want to share with you his opinion, and I happen, unfortunately, to agree with him and believe the position of the mayor of Wauwatosa is naive and wrong. I believe we have violent insurrectionists who want to burn America down, and the part of America they want to burn down is the part that middle-class people live in. Green writes, over the weekend, and he's referring to 2 weekends ago because this appeared a week ago. It just came to my attention today. Over the weekend, so-called protesters in Seattle, Washington descended on the suburbs demanding that local residents give up their private property. As the mob continues its efforts to defund the police and violence continues with a member of Congress even calling for more unrest in the streets, America is clearly in a low-grade civil war. Good term. Or as Attorney General Bill Barr said recently, far-left groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter are engaging in urban guerrilla warfare. Moving out of large cities like New York, Chicago, Portland, Seattle, Minneapolis, Atlanta, St. Louis, and Baltimore, radicals are terrorizing peace-loving Americans in the residential neighborhoods of suburbs and smaller cities and towns like Austin, Colorado Springs, Fort Collins, Nevada City, and even Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. The worst is yet to come, as law enforcement officers are further demoralized while politicians often even take the side of the criminals, and media elites and Democrat leaders ignore, downplay, or lie about the violence. While some remain skeptical about the threat, each news cycle brings more shocking stories of mayhem and murder, like that of a 24-year-old Indiana mother shot dead for telling protesters that all lives matter, or New York worshipers verbally and physically assaulted after a violent mob surrounded their church, or a 14-year-old girl in Harlem beaten in broad daylight while police only stand by and watch after the mob prevented their intervention, or a Virginia woman told by dispatchers to call City Hall because police weren't authorized to help when she and her child were trapped in their car by protesters. So what are law-abiding citizens to do when caught in the mob's crosshairs, or our homes and businesses are looted and destroyed by protesters who are also rioters? Remember, this is written before Kenosha. And what can we do to defend ourselves, our families, neighborhoods, and the nation we love? To begin, we should admit that we are under attack and this is an emergency situation, and that there are forces among us using fascistic and revolutionary tactics to destabilize America and force us onto their own revolutionary ideology. Then we should recall the words of Edmund Burke: the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Remember World War II? There was a critical point when it became clear that appeasement wouldn't work and that the good guys had to stand up to the bad guys to stop them. America rose to the occasion then, and now we must do so again. But instead of bad guys overseas and faraway lands, they're here on home soil, marching through our streets and threatening our lives and property. For good to triumph, however, it takes more than just good guys taking a stand. It's only when good guys get good training and they take their stand that they win. So how do patriotic Americans get the good training that we need to protect our families and neighborhoods? First, we have to get educated and know that what the United States Constitution says about our right to defend ourselves and our communities. Then we have to get physically trained to know how to exercise our rights and property and assess and handle threats, including firearms training. Finally, we have to get the legal protection we will need in the likely event we will face criminal and civil action, even when we do everything correctly. He goes on, sadly, recent events show that many elected officials prefer to appease and mollify the mob. I would say Wauwatosa and Kenosha examples of that. And we watch as police officials are too often told to stand down instead of stand up to the bullies, all while the media rarely report on events accurately. This means it's up to us, liberty-loving Americans from sea to shining sea, to become well-trained men and women bravely standing up to evil while exercising our God-given right to self-protection. Now, I want to make it clear that I don't think kids should be running around with the AR-15s like we saw in Kenosha. But I think it is evident that there is a strategy here from Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and other radical organizations to get out of the cities and go into middle America where people are not used to this kind of trouble at all, and where you have politicians who believe that the best thing to do is to stand back and do nothing. They see this as low-hanging fruit, the easy marks, the easy prey, just as the animal in the woods looks for the injured or lame animal for prey, the one that can't run away. That's what the protesters are doing and what they are targeting here. They're going after neighborhoods and people that they think are easily bullied and easily intimidated. And I don't think it's going to get better. I think it's going to get worse. What we lack in this country is leadership. For those of you who did not see President Trump today in Kenosha, it just makes you proud that you voted for him if you did. This was a strong stance of a leader. While he was being questioned during his law enforcement roundtable, when he took questions from the media, they kept asking him, why aren't you focusing on the peaceful protests? And Trump said, you keep changing on to another thing. I don't care about peaceful protests. Protesting is fine. We are dealing with violent insurrection and rioting in our country, and we have to stop it. The reason the media wants to talk about peaceful protests is that's all they want to show. When I call them the little girl TV reporters, when the rioting is going on, they're told by their anchors to be safe so we don't see firsthand the footage of Kenosha being burned down. That video comes from people taking it to themselves and putting it up on Facebook. The media isn't going to go in there and show how ugly, how evil, how rotten some of this stuff is. The only video of the attack on Officer Mensa's girlfriend's home again came from home video on Facebook. No media there to show it. This is threatening uncivil behavior that is opposed by the vast, overwhelming majority of Americans. But unfortunately, we are led in many cases by community leaders who choose not to enforce the law against this specific mob, even though they want to aggressively enforce things like mask orders. Kenosha, Tosa, Portland, Seattle, Madison, weak leaders who rolled over and allowed uncivil behavior, and in the case of some of those cities, riotous behavior to occur. Wisconsin, led by Tony Evers, who had an opportunity to send in enough force to stop Kenosha from being burned down and chose to do nothing. 10 dozen National Guardsmen. There is another approach, and it is the approach of President Trump. The reason he is hated by people on the radical left is because he is a strong leader. Whether you agree with his approach on all of these things or not, I have the sense that he has America's back. I have no sense that Tony Evers has Wisconsin's back. I have no sense that the leaders of Kenosha had their community's back. If you think this is, well, just some agitation, people upset about a little bit of police shootings, you are missing the point, and you have not been paying attention to what has been building in the weeds of Antifa and other organizations for years. So where does this all come from? People have been asking this question of me. It's the final question I'm going to address in the show for weeks. And a lot of them say, well, it's Soros's money. Well, he does back radical organizations, but that's too simple. It isn't just Soros's money. Where's all this anti-American money coming from? Where's the organization for this? How does a guy like Frank Nitti just get to march across the United States, and who's paying for all of that? And how come none of it gets attached so that he has to finally pay his child support, et cetera? How does all of this happen? Where do all of these people who never work but seem to have budgets for massive, elaborate media campaigns come from? How do you get so many athletes and actors and so on to go out and mouth anti-American rhetoric that infuels and inflames people? Who's driving all of that? Who's driving it? Who's driving it? Who's driving it? News Talk 1130 WISN. Mark Belling, late afternoon show. Jason Woodlock, sports columnist, African American and conservative, as a piece that appears on Imprimis. That's the website that Hillsdale College puts up. It's imprimis.hillsdale.edu. He comments on the incredible cultural influence of professional athletes and says that it's because advertisers pay a fortune to support sports these days because it's the only program out there in which people watch the commercials. When you think about it, most people don't watch TV live anymore. They're either watching streaming stuff in which there's no ads, or they'll record the program and zip to the commercials later on. What do we watch live? Well, sports. This has resulted in athletes getting huge contracts and advertisers paying a fortune to advertise on sports broadcasts. This has made athletes some of the most powerful people in the popular culture. They're paid a lot, and they're paid a lot in terms of their endorsements. Who's paying the endorsements, the bulk of the endorsement money that is making these athletes multimillionaires? As I said, the word starts with a C. Let me pick up Jason Whitlock's column where he addresses his thoughts on this. While American sports have never been more influential, they've also never been more vulnerable to foreign influence. Their partnership with global brands and their desire to build global audiences have given foreign countries a pathway to manipulate American sports and culture. Look at how, here's the C word, China, with its 1.4 billion consumers, rules the National Basketball Association and its de facto parent company, Nike, the same way it rules Hollywood. Access to China's consumers and Asia's cheap labor, even sometimes slave labor, is the key to Nike's economic growth. The Portland-based shoe apparel manufacturer generates $40 billion a year in revenue. Its global reach, agenda, and revenue streams dictate the strategy of the $8 billion a year NBA. Many are unaware that Nike, and not the NBA, controls basketball. One could make a fair argument that the NBA is nothing more than the in-house marketing department of Nike. Both Nike and the NBA kowtow to China, which explains their silence on the horrific human rights abuses inside China and the suppression of Hong Kong freedom fighters by China's communist government. More important, Nike and the NBA's China agenda help explain why Nike pitchman LeBron James and Colin Kaepernick enthusiastically smear the United States as inherently racist and evil. From Joseph Stalin to Fidel Castro to our own time, the communists' favorite propaganda tactic has been to paint the West, and the U.S. in particular, as racist. The militant social justice messaging of James and Kaepernick serves the interests of not only the Chinese Communist Party and globalist corporations like Nike, but also our political left. Kaepernick's national anthem Defiance in 2016 gave the left an opportunity to politicize football, America's new national pastime, and force it into the kind of progressive posturing already commonplace in the NBA and Hollywood. Arrogance, lack of foresight, and the advice of an inner circle that included former Clinton administration press secretary Joe Lockhart as the NFL's vice president of communications explain Commissioner Roger Goodell's laissez-faire approach to Kaepernick's protest. Underestimating the determination of the left and the power of social media to intimidate corporate America, Goodell and the NFL's TV partners wrongly thought that the Kaepernick controversy would fade over time. Instead, 4 years after Kaepernick first knelt, the leftist mob has forced the National Football League, Major League Baseball, the National Hockey League, and the National Basketball Association to take their own knees and pay homage to the dishonest Black Lives Matter narrative on police brutality. The NFL plans to paint social justice messages across its end zones this season and to allow players to wear helmet decals with the names of alleged police victims. The San Francisco 49ers fly a BLM flag next to an American flag at Levi's Stadium. MLB opened its COVID-shortened season with BLM carved into the pitcher's mound, and the Boston Red Sox put a 254-foot BLM billboard outside Fenway Park. NHL players now regularly kneel during the national anthem. The NBA's basketball bubble at Disney World is a virtual shrine to BLM. The entire American sports world, a culture that traditionally celebrates victory, victors, meritocracy, colorblindness, and patriotism, has suddenly immersed itself in black victimization and left-wing radicalism. This immersion threatens to do permanent damage to American culture as a whole. It has certainly undermined national pride. A country that no longer believes in its founding ideals cannot prosper and survive. Now, Whitlock goes on. That's Jason Whitlock. His piece is on Imprimis. He contends that all of this started when China used its essential toady company, Nike, given the fact that everything that Nike does is made in China, often with slave labor, and that these athletes are paid a fortune by Nike and they're taking their talking points from them. Now, if you accept that Nike, which is essentially Chinese, is driving all the stuff that's coming from the athletes. If China is working through Nike to get to the athletes, our spokespersons and our heroes, why wouldn't China be working through Antifa? And why wouldn't China be working through other agitators? And why wouldn't they create shell corporations that pay off some of these people? If you want to take a look at who would be the beneficiary, if America collapses from within because of internal divide, wouldn't the biggest winner be China? It certainly explains the sudden soft spot that the left in America has in its heart for China. There's no better way to buy off the American left than with money. When you see sports worlds, when you see sports leagues, when you see so many others putting out an anti-American message right now, when you see situations like the one in Minneapolis turning into the civil war we see in America, you have to ask yourself, who's the winner? Well, if the winner is China, it would explain a lot of things. If Nike and the Nike athletes on Nike's payroll are the mouthpieces here, it would explain a lot of things. And finally, this as we go to break. What American city out of all of them is the one right now most gutted and ripped apart? I'd say Portland, the American corporate home of Nike.